1 minute.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is now time for another week of the most disruptive show covering news and events across our divided states, as well as across the surface of our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, going into the news this morning, in the headlines, first up in COVID news, according to the CDC in the U.S., the total COVID-19 cases as of yesterday has reached 17,592,760, with the total deaths at 315,260. Yesterday added about 2,624 new deaths to that number. Last night, Congress finally agreed on a $900 billion COVID-19 stimulus deal. The deal includes restarting a $300 boost to the federal unemployment insurance benefit, extending eviction moratoriums for renters for an unspecified amount of time with $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and an up to $600 direct payment to most Americans, plus $600 per child. The size of the payment would be reduced for those earning more than $75,000 in 2019. Some European countries, including France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, and the Netherlands, have barred some combination of flights, vehicle traffic, trains, and freight coming from the UK. This is over worries about its new coronavirus strain. Austria and Sweden are reportedly preparing to do the same. The UK identified a new COVID variant that can spread more quickly than prior strains. It is currently unclear whether the new strain transmits more easily, makes people sicker, or changes the way their immune system responds to the virus if they were already infected or vaccinated. Let's stop there. A couple of big headlines. Let's go back actually a minute here. What do you think about the stimulus deal? This has been in talks for months and months and months and months building up to this. What's your take, Jamarl?
I'm going to cover this in the monologue, but woefully inadequate. I mean, keep in mind, the PPP loans, the first time around, the majority of that money went to big business, not small business, despite the fact that they kept saying it's going to small business, it's going to small business, but they fought and they wouldn't let that information come out. And when the information came out, no wonder they were embarrassed, including Trump got some of the money or this organization. Like, it was a scam. And so now they're doing a new PPP loan program. The question is, do they have the double dipping? They said it depends on the revenue loss. That was the other thing that they were going to allow in it. $600, and that money goes down if you're making, more than $75,000? No, this is radically inadequate. I mean, if you look at other countries that don't have near the financial base of the United States, they are doing more. Like, it's $600 is... that's unseemly. They gave more money than that to the tax cuts that Trump was given. So, yeah, I find it to be massively inadequate. The public should be pissed. But that's where I'm at.
I hear you on that one. And I agree. Yeah, the public has a lot to be pissed about. Of course, usually what happens is the public ends up getting pissed at each other. or pissed at the opposite side of the political aisle, not necessarily the political system as such. And as our frequent guest Garland Nixon likes to tell us, it's really just one party. So I kind of agree with that in large part. Anyway, back to the headlines here. Pompeo blames Russia, and Trump sort of blames China, but downplays this. This is the over the massive cyber attack that resulted in multiple data breaches at top federal agencies through a third-party software vendor known as SolarWinds. That attack is being linked to Russia by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In an interview on Friday, Pompeo said, quote, "This was a very significant effort, and I think it's the case that now we can say pretty clearly that it was the Russians that engaged in this activity. We can't say much more as we're still unpacking precisely what it is, and I'm sure some of it will remain classified," end quote. On Saturday, President Trump tweeted his first public comments on the issue, saying, quote, "The cyber hack is far greater in the fake news media than in actuality. I have been fully briefed and everything is well under control. Russia, Russia, Russia is the priority chant when anything happens because lamestream is, for mostly financial reasons, petrified of discussing the possibility that it may be China. It may. There could also have been a hit on our ridiculous voting machines during the elections, which is now obvious that I won big, making it an even more corrupted embarrassment for the USA," end quote. He tagged Ratcliffe, Director of National Intelligence John Ratcliffe, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo in those tweets. Yeah, we a lot more to talk about here. The main thing I see is the national security establishment and the State Department in this case, headed up, of course, by Pompeo, pivoting to blame Russia. And after years of China being the enemy of the presidency, of the White House, from 2016 to 2020 approximately, it looks like Democrats in the Biden administration and the national security establishment as a whole are sort of trying to pivot to the other main international enemy of the United States, trying to make Russia more of an enemy than they need to be or frankly are. So that's what I see happening here. I can get into specifics about why exactly these hacks aren't actually associated with the country, how we don't know that, how no evidence has been put forward in the media linking them to this, and how the assertion that APT-29, which is the group supposed to be responsible for this, is a Russian group is itself a massive assumption, a couple of assumptions rolled into one. Anyway, I've already explained that before, but we can always come back to that sometime later on as we need to. And ideally get some guests on to talk about it too. Anyway, next headline here. Sarah Palin throws her lot in with Assange. Former vice presidential candidate Sarah Palin has publicly changed her position on WikiLeaks. During the 2008 election, while she was running for vice president under John McCain, WikiLeaks published Palin's hacked emails. The emails did not contain anything scandalous, but news organizations called for volunteers to help reporters dig through them. Despite the history, Palin has just released a video supporting the pardon of Assange, and we have that clip from that video. It's on Twitter. I saw this. Let's play this clip, Andre.
Hey, this is Sarah Palin up in Alaska, and I am the first one to admit when I make a mistake. I admit that I made a mistake some years ago not supporting Julian Assange, thinking that he was a bad guy, that he leaked material that perhaps he shouldn't, and I've learned a lot since then. And I think Julian did the right thing, and Julian did us all a favor in America, did the world a favor by fighting for what he believed was right. And ultimately, he's been proven to be right. He deserves a pardon.
And there we go. Just interesting to hear that coming from her. I mean, it's weird, man. It is weird to see the right pivoting on a lot of this stuff. And I mean, if formerly, as far as I can tell, during the Obama administration and on, both parties were opposed to Assange, but it seemed to me, and opposed to WikiLeaks broadly, but it seemed to me like the Republicans might have been a little bit more strident with it. That might just be my, perception in hindsight or something like that. But it's just weird to see Democrats silent on this and Republican after Republican with Giuliani, Palin, Trump talking about a pardon, potentially going to be rolling that through in his last weeks here. It's weird to see it happening. What do you think about this, Jamarl?
I'm curious as to why Sarah Palin is saying this. I'm really curious about this, right? Because she says, well, she came out. I mean, yes, it's fair that people are talking about pardons now that Trump is leaving. So that's fair. But I am really curious about why now. Like, did she come out Look, I'm glad she came out. Excellent. And shockingly, everything she said there was absolutely correct. Julian Assange is a publisher. He is a national treasure. He was releasing information that was waste, fraud, abuse, illegalities. Those things should be defended by definition almost. Like, this is like the Edward Snowden argument. Edward Snowden, by the way, came out for Julian Assange. He says, Donald Trump, if you could do one thing in your presidency, let that be to give Julian Assange a pardon. So, if you are Edward Snowden and you release information showing that the government is doing mass illegal spying, like literally illegal, you even had Clapper lie to Congress about this, how on earth can you chase Edward Snowden? If anything is if there's any belief in any notion of a whistleblower law, it should be for that. And yet it wasn't. And the truth of it is, it depends on who you whistleblow on. Like, there's some people who are connected, there's some people who are not. So if you're leaking information on Trump, you will be protected. If you are leaking information, let's say on a torture program, or if you're leaking information on, I don't know, something else, let's say of something else going on from the standpoint of waste, fraud, and abuse for somebody who don't necessarily like you leaking that information, you will be prosecuted. Go back and look at Obama. Obama was locking people up left and right under the espionage laws. And then when you get into Trump, Democrats flip and say we must protect the whistleblower. It's really weird. But Assange, Snowden, none of these guys should be prosecuted, especially if we really do believe in any notion of whistleblower laws. So,
well, especially because here's the thing, man. What is blowing the whistle? What are you blowing the whistle on? It seems like in the Trump administration, most of the quote unquote whistleblowing that was going on, the term was an equivocation. They weren't blowing the whistle on like deep malfeasance or on, the intelligence community's problematic hijinks or just abuses of power, but plenty of which is there to reveal, I'm sure. They were blowing the whistle on things that Trump was doing wrong, that they were saying that Trump was doing wrong. It was like one person after another breaking ranks, at least hypothetically, with the establishment. In reality, the assumption there is that whether they're acting independently or they're acting in concert with their higher ups, they're doing this as part of a move that's a political move against the president of the United States. And I'm not saying that's like defend him necessarily, but that's not the same thing as Snowden coming out, to talk about what the NSA was doing and the warrantless wiretapping and everything that was going on. It's nowhere near the level of caliber. In other words, they were using the term whistleblower and the idea of whistleblowing as a moral aegis to try to protect people who, frankly, probably didn't deserve protection in a lot of cases. Anyway, we've gone over that in the
protect
past.
Strategy, by the way. Like, Trump would say, I want to take the troops out of Afghanistan, and all of a sudden there's a leak that the Russians were paying Afghanistan to kill Americans, or Taliban to kill Americans.
Yep.
Or
yes.
Or Ukraine. That was another big one. It says the president of the United States doesn't want to use or give Ukraine weapons to fight the Russians. It's like, wait a minute, Obama didn't do that either. But that doesn't matter. It's so weird. Yeah, it's the whistleblower thing was a canard. It was a red herring on basically the attack.
Yeah, man, those were
that he could do anyway.
They were not blowing whistles. They were like poking leaks in the dike or something like that, or poking leaks in the hull of the boat. Those were leaks. That's not the same thing. It's leaks against a political not a political candidate. It's a political figure in order to try to drag that political figure down. It's not that you're revealing deep wrongs in the system. You're just saying things to the press that they can report that's going to make this guy look bad. And again, like you're saying, in many cases, things that Obama did as well or didn't do. Anyway, got a couple more headlines to get through here. 6 Hungarian opposition parties have announced that they will unite in an effort to unseat Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his ruling Fidesz party in the 2022 national elections. The parties on Sunday formally agreed to coordinate a single joint candidate to oppose Fidesz in each of Hungary's 106 electoral districts and to run on a single electoral list. They will also run on a common platform and hold a primary election to select a joint prime ministerial candidate to run against Orban, who has won 3 consecutive elections and has led the country since 2010. The parties are ideologically disparate and include the liberal Momentum, right-wing Jobbik, and Green Party Dialogue. In a statement, they said their cooperation would not represent a merger, but that they would put aside their differences in pursuit of what they called a, quote, change in era, end quote. And in our last quick tech headline here, Tesla is narrowing the time frame for its full self-driving subscription rollout, with CEO Elon Musk telling his Twitter followers that the pay-per-month package is now due to arrive early next year. That's early 2021. And with that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And we are going into a break. We're going to be back on the other side of this break with the soapbox. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back with the wise words of Thomas in Fault Lines Soapbox on the other side of this break in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
In a media landscape filled with so-called journalists acting as stenographers for their billionaire bosses, there is a desperate need for news, analysis, and perspectives that buck the status quo and get to the heart of how domestic and international events impact you and me, as well as showing how we can get involved in the struggle to change that status quo. Check out By Any Means Necessary on Radio Sputnik, Monday through Friday from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, to hear the stories and voices that mainstream media refuses to tell you. And join us as we connect the political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us. That's By Any Means Necessary, Monday through Friday at 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement makes this show what it is, and we appreciate it. So, Congress comes together and comes up with a $900 billion stimulus. Now, think back for a moment. A few weeks ago, the fight was over $2.2 trillion to $1.8 trillion. And somewhere along the way, that number was halved when Joe Biden won the election. That's astonishing. The Democratic Party maintain the House, take the presidency, and yet lose in the negotiations, where the Republicans seemingly almost wanting to just shame and embarrass Pelosi, cuts the number in half that Trump was offering, almost to put a circle around the fact that the negotiations were being made in bad faith. I think that's probably true. These guys were going back and forth over this notion of a negotiation in order to try to make it hurt for Trump. Fair enough. But what does that mean? What is the consequence of that? And now, after all of this time, they finally come up with another stimulus. Radically inadequate stimulus. Cancel rents. Yeah, that's not in it. Cancel student loans. That's not in it. Ensure that the bulk of the money will go to the small business, as opposed to before. The first time around, the PPP loans, the overwhelming majority of that money went to big business. And the Trump administration, or the Small Business Administration, fought tooth and nail to keep that information of who that money went to. And of course, when it was revealed, big business. All of these businesses went belly up. One of the reports was showing the number of minority business that basically shut down. It was like 40%. You had 80 or 90% that didn't get any of the money, that was basically locked out of the PPP loans. And yes, the rest of small business America, I've watched as businesses were shut down and prevented from opening. You would have one business that for whatever particular reason can open, and then across the street, the other business can't. And the business goes belly up because those businesses depend upon business. And if the government comes out and says, we're going to shut you down because of COVID, then you kind of need to attend to the business and the needs of that business, not to mention the employees who work at that business. And again, I'm being very specific to small business. I'm not talking about the Trump organization that can get their hands on the money. I'm not talking about the basketball or the football teams or these other organizations and these other people who are monstrously wealthy that can still get their hands on the cash, despite the fact that small business can't. No, I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about small businesses that basically employ everyday Americans to keep those people on the payroll and keep those businesses afloat. This doesn't ensure $2,000 a person, not even $1,200 a person. And it's a one-time payment of $600. And the $600 is not even for every American. If it's over $100,000, the money basically goes away. And between $75K and I think it was like $100K, there's the money depreciates. And yeah, Medicare for all with COVID, not so much. These things are rational policies in a government that basically cares in some measure about the social safety net. And it doesn't seem to be. Don't give Democrats a pass on this. At the end of the day, when Republicans negotiate the weirdest and out there things with the idea that they can toss those things overboard to get the actual things that they want. So if I want to ensure that the businesses can double dip, maybe I'm going to say, I don't want anybody that's dirt poor receiving any of the money. And Democrats are like, oh my God, we got to fight that. We got to fight that. It's like, okay, I'll negotiate that away as long as you give me, let's not have 1,200, let's have 600. Meaning, it's one thing to have a negotiation where you try to knock it out of the rafters and you try to make your political opponent suffer because of them pushing back against what you are trying to do. That's not what's happening here. The Democratic Party, I keep telling you this, for the most part, agrees with the premise of the Republican Party, meaning these things are gradients. These things are not radically different between one another. The Democratic Party could have took the position that we want Medicare for all with COVID. We want Medicare for all in general. 74% of the public want it. You can even show the Fox News clip showing it. 88% of the Democratic Party want it. Even a majority of Republicans want it. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We have all of these people ill. That could be an argument that the party makes with the idea that you're not going to get Medicare for all, but you might get Medicare for all with COVID. I am making the point that you knock it out of the rafters. You make these negotiations. You push for the interests of the American public, but that is not done. Because at the end of the day, these guys basically agree. The modicum of variance that's between these things, the paucity of difference, is not great at all. Think for the moment of everything that it takes to make this country work. You have, 320 million people, give or take, in this country? And you have people basically building the lines, writing the software, pouring the coffee. You have the people who do the streets. All of these things that makes this country operate and go. Water clean, air clean, food clean, all of those things. Now, in thinking of all of those things that make it go, think of all of the mental and physical energies that individuals in this country use the entirety of their life to dedicate and give themselves to the society. Yes, they're doing it to get paid. By the same token, they're also doing it because sometimes it just rattles in them to do it. And for whatever reason they do it, it is giving back to our society their mental and physical energies. Now, do those people deserve a social safety net or not? And what I mean by this is all of us, for the most part, are a collective in this country, and we in this country can make a determination on how we live and what we push, what we represent, what are our bare minimums, lowest common denominator in regards to our society, and yes, what we're willing to represent in the midst of a pandemic. And what it comes across is if the federal government just doesn't care. When you look around the globe at some of these other nations, and you look here, the federal government just doesn't care. And I'm wondering, and not just wondering, I assume that it has to do, in some part, because the federal government is not scared of the population. That's what I think it is. When Richard Nixon was sitting in the White House and he was burning the buses and they're going to come and get us, Henry. Well, Nixon had somewhat of a healthy fear of the population, at the very least from the standpoint of an electorate that was active, animated. That doesn't seem to be the case these days. Yes, we had the Black Lives Matter protests, but those were very specific to issues of race. And instead of dealing on the issue of poverty, with this idea of hitting the same thing of cop abuses and everything else, this was specific to the issue of race. So instead of a class argument and a class attack, let's say like the Yellow Vest movement, or let's say like in India where you have 200 million people protesting, we got a protest specifically within the context of race, which misses the devastating effect of class that is taking place right now in our society. I mean, think for the moment of the rents, for example. Yes, they're putting off the rents for some people, and that's not everybody. But even when they're putting off those rents, you understand that those rents are still accumulating. So the person who couldn't necessarily pay their rent in, let's say, July, August, September, October, November, December, January is somehow going to have all of that money to pay in February. They're not. They're going to get evicted. What about the medical bills? They have the thing in the provision saying no surprise medical bills, and that it's going to go to some kind of third person in order to make the determination. Like, some of this stuff is just really bizarre, as opposed to dealing with the basic needs of the population. Let's make sure everybody's healthcare bill is taken care of. I mean, what, 20 million people or something like that affected, and all of those people are going to have medical bills. They're going to have to pay for the COVID-19 treatment. At the very least, it seems Gillette is charging, what, $7,000 for the pill or for the drug or something, for the treatment, even though a lot of that came from us. Look, just to make this point clear, all of us make the society go. We're a collective. We choose what we want to represent in the society, what we emulate, what our value set is. People use the term value all the time, but for whatever particular reason, doesn't necessarily hit upon anything that matches up with real values. I am making the point that there should be a lowest common denominator in our society, that we, as a society itself, can make a determination on what we want to represent and what we don't. And Congress is out to lunch. You have a bunch of millionaires who are basically telling people that $600 will be enough. I think this is obscene. And this is one of those moments where you see a yellow vest movement, you see the strike that's taking place in India, and yes, you should see something at this point that springs up in America and says enough. I don't think you're going to see it, though. What do you think, Shane? Do you think, or at the very least, I don't think you're going to see it this month, but I think you're going to see it at some point. It has to happen at some point. There's going to be an inflection point. What do you think, Shane?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen right now. I think that after this summer, especially, if there were a wider movement, it would have been this summer. But a lot of folks were calling that a color revolution. A lot of folks were calling what happened this summer an effective attempted coup against Trump, or at least, a sort of cultural insurgency that would damage his election prospects. I'm not sure how much I see that as planned, versus organic. But it was certainly, Democrats certainly tried to seize the reins of that. I don't know, man. We're definitely not in a moment for it right now. I agree with you that we need more, but frankly, a lot of the more that we needed should have been done in advance. In other words, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And if they had prepared for this pandemic more effectively, then we'd be doing a lot better on this side of it. I mean, part of this is, do I need another $600? Like, I'm not rich by any means. I'm not, don't have a high net worth or anything like that. But I am like relatively stable right now. Thankfully, due to this job. If I got $600, I would probably just put that in like a savings account to try to make sure that I'm stable in the future, because who knows what's going to happen down the line. And I know that, the majority of Americans are not in that position right now. A minority of Americans are. So what I'm arguing is, like, maybe as a cost-cutting measure, you do selective distributions. Like, I probably don't need that $600, but there are a lot of people who need $800 or $1,000, and that probably held true when the $1,200 stimulus checks came out earlier in the year as well. Of course, that gets a little bit expensive, and immediately that's a political hornet's nest. But that would both reduce the total, the total dollar amount of the bill, making it somewhat easier to get through Congress. And it would mean that the people who actually needed it got more of the aid. So that's thing one. I kind of want to know why there wasn't more conversation around doing that, other than, again, it is a political hornet's nest to say, okay, some people need this bailout, other people don't. But that's a flat fact truth as far as I can tell. Anyway, I agree with you. I do not see a political insurgency happening right now. I don't see any serious civil unrest or the potential for it, especially because, frankly, everybody's just sort of stuck in their homes for the most part, other than the Antifa Proud Boys fights going on pretty regularly now in some cities across the U.S. People are just sitting at home. We're just sort of stuck in the bread and circuses thing. And thankfully, a little bit of bread just got doled out. So that's holding up that end of the political dynamic. But the circuses are abundant, and I don't think they're going to stop going into a Biden administration. I think they're going to accelerate. It's just what form the boogeyman in America takes. I think one way to look at this, maybe, and I'm pivoting slightly, Hillary Clinton called a bunch of folks deplorables. I'm wondering if Biden is going to not call people deplorables, but sort of take up that tack again as the permanent political opposition in the United States and what that is going to look like, or if it's just going to be primarily foreign foes like Russia, namely. Does that make sense? We got to go into a break tomorrow, but what's your take on that?
I think so. I understand where you're coming from. Let me just say this, though. The United States government has a capacity. We're a sovereign currency. It could give everybody $2,000 and not blink. I mean, the money that they were doling out from the standpoint of those tax cuts, Trump passed tax cuts and then put those tax cuts on the back of middle class and the poor. Like, I understand where you're coming from, but we're at a time where we need to be dropping money from helicopters in the way that Mark Frost said. And I agree with Mark Frost on that. I agree with the libertarian.
But here's the thing. No, and you do. But what he said was, and then the people need to spend it. And if you look at how some of the people got this money, like I'm saying, I wouldn't spend it. I don't want another gadget.
You don't care enough about America to spend that money, Shane? You don't love America enough to spend the stimulus check?
No, that's a horrible 20th century anachronism at this point. And most folks don't. No, they just want, either to stay alive or to stay stable if they think they can stay alive. In any event, we have to go into a break. We'll be back to talk more about this later, I'm sure. But we're going into a break. We'll be back on the other side of this break with Andrei Nekrasov talking about Sergei Magnitsky, Bill Browder, international sanctions, and recent updates in this whole narrative of events. In any event, you're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines. We divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today. Get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and digs straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Nekrasov. We are joined at this point by Andrei Nekrasov, the writer and director of the film The Magnitsky Act, behind the scenes, also the writer and director of many more films than that. And by the way, you can follow Andrei on Twitter at Anti-Putinismus. That is Anti-Putinismus. And you can watch The Magnitsky Act behind the scenes at MagnitskyAct.com. Andrei, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Thank you. I'm okay. Hunkering down in amid this pandemic and closed borders everywhere in Europe. Anyway, but how are you? How are you in the U.S.?
All right. That's in some sense a loaded question because, of course, the U.S., the world's epicenter of COVID. I am personally okay. I'm out in South Dakota. Jamarl's out in Maryland, and things are not. Interestingly enough, interstate borders are definitely not locked down. Travel's being restricted in California, specifically out of people's houses, but you can pretty much drive around, which is interesting, of course, because we're getting hit hard. We've been hit very hard. And this is particularly, this would hit you hard because you are a world traveler. I think if I remember correctly, you would frequently be flying between Germany, between Russia, occasionally the States. In any event, I'm actually go for it.
UK and Scandinavia,
and the United Kingdom, yes. And for background for folks, we're going to get into Sergei Magnitsky, Bill Browder, and more recent updates on this, including attempts at getting Magnitsky Acts passed around the globe and failures, although they're incomplete failures, with his name, Magnitsky's name not being attached. These laws being passed called Magnitsky style bills. So they effectively impose the same types of sanctions, give the same ability to impose sanctions, but without bearing his name, without giving more testament to Browder's story. But for background for folks, yes, exactly, in the EU. Can you explain who you are and what your perspective on Russia is broadly?
Well, I'm relatively well known as a critic of the Russian government of Vladimir Putin, and I made a number of films just kind of in that sort of line, and on a number of things, starting with the war in Chechnya, and a war in Georgia, and poisoning of Litvinenko in London, and others. But then I thought that a tax accountant called Sergei Magnitsky, who is still not very well known in the world, but very well known in Russia and in Europe now, would be my next sort of hero. Someone who I thought was fighting corruption in Russia, and the whole story was told by a certain Bill Browder, who is also becoming well known. He wasn't at all at the time. At the time, he was just a hedge fund manager, successful one in Russia, having made all his money in Russia in the 90s and the early noughties. And so basically, he wasn't known much for anything but that, basically making money, except that he then went out and told a story, very kind of moving story, I thought, about his tax. He keeps calling him lawyer, which was the first thing I noticed, which was not correct. He's a tax, an accountant. He was calling him a tax lawyer. The difference might sound slight, but it's a big difference, and there's some sort of deeply rooted sort of reason for Browder saying basically lies. So unfortunately, the whole story turned out to be a lie, and what I call a sort of false alibi for Browder, who was wanted in Russia for tax evasion. So basically, but then because of this sort of the world. And by the way, when I was making critical films about Russia, both Browder and some politicians like Tony Blair would actually be quite friendly with Putin. But and I was critical because of the war in Chechnya, but then at about after about 2014. The world changing, and with election of Trump, and before the election of Trump, Russia became sort of this kind of, as the French say, bouc émissaire, kind of bête noire, the new enemy, which is very convenient. And so Browder kind of used this situation, and also I think even slightly kind of provoked it, by claiming that Russia basically murdered his tax lawyer because he was fighting corruption, Putin's regime even. So, and in fact, it was just a story just to divert attention from his financial misdeeds from his tax evasion charge, because Russia was, basically asking he's based in the UK, rather, asking England to extradite him. And this is an amazing story, because then he managed to lobby this Magnitsky Act, a bill, in the US, in Congress, in Canada, in the UK, and a few other countries, and basically on the basis of a hoax, which is an extraordinary story. So now most people and most politicians and most mainstream media just kind of they've bought wholesale his story and repeating this lie. So I don't think there's any hoax on that scale, at least in the recent history.
How was he able to lobby all of these governments? Like you said, it was a fraud, basically, and he was lying. But how was he able to get that much influence in regards to getting the various governments to, A, acknowledge his story or even listen to his story? And B, I know, they were looking for a new boogeyman, but even in looking for the new boogeyman, it seems, I guess I'm wondering, how did that happen? What were the mechanics of that?
Well, I mean, it all started in America. That's why I think it's important for the American audiences to know this. This it sounds very obscure, but it's actually, I think it's very central to the understanding of the world today, because you can basically, talk to a few people, and one of them was, as far as I know, Mr. Weiner, wasn't he? Who also
Jonathan Weiner.
Yeah, exactly. Jonathan Weiner. So some lawyers, some PR kind of specialists who would kind of concoct, prepare you this sort of, a narrative, and then Browder, by the way, isn't even an American citizen. He sounds American because he's born in America, has an American accent, but he gave up his American passport because for tax, basically. He didn't want to pay tax in the States. So there's a complete mystery, and this sort of guy goes around in Washington and in Congress and has such influence. It is, and obviously having a vested interest in this story. This is a story of financial crime, which he kind of slits completely, 180 degrees, saying that it wasn't him who did, who wasn't paying taxes, who was involved in these scams, but the Russian government. So, and everybody takes his word for it, and to cast this story in stone, in concrete. He invents this sort of campaign for human rights. And these human rights laws, not just in America, but across the recent development was to try to do it in the European Union. The European Union is 27 countries. So, you're asking me how can this happen? I'm wondering myself. It's not just his charm, It's not just his kind of. There must be something there. Maybe some. We don't know. Maybe some government agencies may be involved. He was actually. It was a couple of years ago. It turned out there's this organization called Integrity Initiative. It was initially in the UK, but funded by government, and basically the sort of network and influence. Tellingly called Integrity in their view, Integrity Initiative. And Browder was the head. There were lists of people in many countries, and Browder was on the top of the UK list of that Integrity Initiative. So it must have some support, governmental support, or maybe some sort of special services. Who knows? But there must be a reason for his influence. Because actually, it's almost like it would have been a joke that somebody can just creates this alibi for himself. There was in Russian literature there's lots of these stories, with writers called Sotnikov, Shadrin, and Gogol, and it would have been even funny, except that it's very, very sad, and it's not only sad for the relationship with Russia. It tells a lot about the sort of crisis in the systems of Western countries, United States, UK, and others. So I think it's a very worrying kind of signal to all.
The irony. We have to go into a break, but Andre, the sadness that you're talking about, or that irony. I mean, just to try to sum it up briefly, Browder committed a tax crime in another country after reneging on his U.S. citizenship, after getting his trying to get his U.S. citizenship annulled effectively to avoid paying taxes. He committed a tax fraud in Russia. Then he said that the Russian government committed that against itself, that certain elements within the government defrauded the Russian treasury. And then he has since, in an effort to cover up his crimes, he has launched a sort of worldwide diplomatic spectacle, a legal spectacle, trying to get various countries to sign on to punishing entities within Russia that should have had the right to punish him. And in the process, he has thrown a major wedge in relations between, in the way of relations between Russia and various countries in the EU, between Russia and the United Kingdom, between Russia and the United States, et cetera. That irony, that weird, tragic sort of self-punishing turn of events. I see exactly what you're saying. In any event, want to get back into this, we have to go into a break. We are joined for this segment and the next by Andrei Nekrasov. He is a writer and director of many films, including the Magnitsky Act. Behind the scenes, we're talking about that with him now. We will be back with Andre on the other side of this break in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history. This week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Nekrasov. We are joined by Andrei Nekrasov is joining us, the writer and director of the film, The Magnitsky Act, behind the scenes. You can follow Andrei on Twitter, by the way, at Antiputinismus, and you can watch The Magnitsky Act behind the scenes at MagnitskyAct.com. Andrei, thank you again for being with us. I want to continue this conversation. Tried to sum up the sort of state of events there on the other side of the break. Let's go into what's happening these days. Maybe we can. We're trying to bring Jamarl up to speed on this story. Trying to bring members of the audience up to speed on this story because, like you said in the last segment, it's interesting in a couple of ways. It's important. It is a window into the state of corruption in Western governments around the world, which is ironic and sad again because it's used usually as a cudgel against the Russian government, with Browder making accusations that the Russian government is corrupt. And I don't live in Russia. I'm guessing there's corruption there. But what should be striking to many people who hear this narrative or are affected by it is how Browder himself has used the sort of wheels of power to cover up his own fraud, his own tax evasion. Anyway, let's bring folks up to what's going. Let's bring folks up to speed on what's happening these days. He has been going around trying to get Magnitsky Acts passed in various places in the United States, in the UK, successfully on both counts, as well as in Australia and the European Union generally. What's happened? Can you just bring folks up to speed? What has happened with the EU Magnitsky Act?
Yeah,
Andre.
Well, he always said that Browder always said that EU is maybe the biggest prize because it's 27 countries which are you can with one stroke of a pen, you can do 27 countries. It's obviously important because it's Europe, because it's next to Russia. And a lot of people, it's easier for Russians to travel to Europe for obvious reasons than to the US. And so that was the biggest prize. And he really tried hard. And the important thing for him, because officially all those acts or laws, legislations are, what are they? They're called sort of human rights legislations, where people are sanctioned. Mostly Russians now, but then later for the kind of to basically divert attention from this very prejudiced fact, because obviously there's human rights violations in Russia, but everywhere else as well. And so Browder then invented sort of so-called global Magnitsky Act, and now he can punish just about anyone, because actually nobody knows who are those people, who are these, to those laws, the so-called Magnitsky lists are attached, and nobody knows who puts people on those lists, because it started, by the way, with those who investigated Browder, in Russia for tax evasion. Imagine somebody investigates you, and you have this magic wand to put your enemies on the sanctions list, and that's exactly what happened. So, but then, as I was saying, the EU is the biggest prize, and he tried. The important thing for him is to have a name. It sounds symbolic, but it's the key for Browder. So have the name of Sergei Magnitsky on those legislations. In the States, it is he got that. It's called Magnitsky Act, and in the EU, he managed to start a process, and now it's completed for the so-called sanctions regime to be adopted. But he failed to put the name of Magnitsky up there. So basically what he's doing, he because he has this whole network of journalists, basically, copy-paste his story. And the second best option was to call it Magnitsky style act or law, and refer to the U.S. Magnitsky Act, but in fact, it's nothing of the kind. It's if you look at the European Union documents, there's no name of Magnitsky, and but as I said, it's second best because people they don't look into those documents. Browder sort of takes precedence. What Browder says is being repeated. And again, the big question, why he has such influence. Another interesting thing I just want to add, that you may have, in Europe, he's now well known, obviously well known in Russia, a certain Mr. Navalny, who is supposed to be the leader of the Russian opposition.
Alexei Navalny you're talking about.
All right. Okay. Well, he was poisoned, or supposedly poisoned, because we didn't get to the bottom of this. The Russian government denied any involvement, and he was. They let him out. The Russians let him out. He traveled to Berlin, and. So the reason why I mention him is that because as I said, Russians have some Russians are even kind of a bit humorous about it, because say how come if we poison all these people, how come they all survive? This is so basically. I'm not taking a position on that because I didn't see the facts. As I told you, I made a film about Litvinenko, and even then I was basically very open. I know what I know, and I use open sources. And in Navalny, I have no information. So, but it's very important to understand that the Russian people like Navalny are actually he was the first to spread Browder's story in Russia, because
was he?
Magnitsky Browder didn't. Yeah, he's like the flagship he's a blogger. Browder didn't have much access to Russian audiences, but Navalny was the one who made the story famous in Russia, and of course repeating Browder's story because it suits him. So it's in this, and that's why I'm taking a slightly more dialectic position these days. I'm still critical of the Russian government, but if the alternative is Navalny, this means that we're going to go back to basically the 90s, the early days of privatization, when the Russian people were basically suffering. And people like Browder were making their fortunes. So you see what I'm getting at. So
yes, well, I mean, and that was how Browder got rich, like exactly like you're saying.
Exactly.
And so Browder made his fortune in the late 90s, early 2000s through these stock buyback programs, basically, or not a stock buyback, through the voucher privatization program, effectively, where Russian citizens were given ownership, partial ownership of companies, and then you had these vulture capitalists who'd come in and buy those vouchers up for pennies on the dollar, taking ownership of the companies and the resources they had the rights to, and effectively expropriating them overseas in many cases, picking away the carcass of the USSR.
Yeah, and of course he wasn't the only one to do it, and I agree that it's very unfair. But he wasn't the only one to do it. But the problem is that he was also breaking the law, and now kind of created this sort of movement, human rights movement, quote unquote, based on this lie. So my question is, if this is the alternative to Putin, people should think twice. And I'm saying as Putin's critic, but what should we go by thinking what the alternative to Putin is if Mr. Navalny, who's basically Browder's kind of mouthpiece, what are we going to get, politically? So that's an important point to make.
Yeah, well, and another interesting thing here. Jamarl, I want to let you come in, but just one other quick point to make. So you have, as far as I can tell, 4 major poisoning narratives coming out of Russia, surrounding Russia. You have, first of all, Litvinenko. You have, second, Alexander Perepelichny. I'll come back to him. Then you have the Skripals, and most recently you have the accusations of the Navalny poisoning. So there are 4 sets of events. And the second one, and this wasn't as widely reported in the West as the Skripal poisonings, the accusations, the alleged poisonings, or the Navalny alleged poisoning. But this was nevertheless, it was the second one, and this ties directly into Browder's story. And so from the intelligence angle, you talked about how you don't know why Browder is able to do this, where he's coming from. Yeah. For one thing, he was backed by HSBC, Hong Kong Shanghai Banking Corporation, which I've looked into it a bit. Seemed to have links to British intelligence. Browder himself, UK citizen at this point.
He might.
He might. I'm not making a specific allegation here by any means, but it's possible. Anyway, it's just It's just interesting. Jamarl, you were cutting in there. I didn't mean to cut you off. What were you going to say?
So, Integrity Initiative. You mentioned that Browder, it was being pushed by the Intelligence Initiative. Just for people who, so Intelligence Initiative was this thing in the UK. It was an aspect of the government, but it was this kind of shadowy organization that was basically attacking Jeremy Corbyn, which is mind-blowing since they're part of the government. And supposedly they are fighting Russian influence in UK politics, and just so happened ended up on Corbyn. You said Browder was being pushed by these guys?
Well, he was. There was a leak. So how we knew about it? There was a leak which showed the lists of people, in not just in the UK but in many countries. And Browder was on the top. He was kind of the top of those sort of key people, the agents, whatever you can call them, on those Integrity Initiative lists. Among them were journalists, business people, politicians, activists, and the Browder was the number one. So this must say something, I think. Yeah, and it clearly, as you said, it was a shadow sort of network financed, I think, by the UK government, and it looked like some sort of intelligence or sort of influence or both sort of network. But a lot of people were kind of very embarrassed by it. And sort of trying to explain, some kind of had no idea why they're on this list, but clearly rather fit.
Andre, let me interrupt you for a moment. We have to end it here because we're hitting up against the hour. But the voice that you guys have been hearing is Andre Nekrasov, writer and director of the film The Magnitsky Act, Behind the Scenes. You guys can follow Andre on Twitter at anti-Putinism. Well, ANTIPUTINISMUS, and watch The Magnitsky Act Behind the Scenes at MagnitskyAct.com. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That has to mean you guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines. In the news, daily stats. According to the CDC in the United States, the total COVID-19 cases as of yesterday is 17,592,760, with the total deaths at 315,260. Yesterday added 2,624 new deaths to that number. That is massively disturbing. Yesterday, Congress finally agreed on a $900 billion COVID-19 stimulus deal. The deal includes restarting $300 to boost the federal unemployment insurance benefit, extend eviction moratoriums for renters for an unspecified amount of time, with $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and up to $600 direct payment to most Americans, plus $600 per child. The size of the payment will be reduced to those earning more than $75,000 in 2019. If the first COVID story wasn't bad enough, here's another one. The EU countries, France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, and the Netherlands, have all borrowed some combination of flights, vehicle traffic, trains, and freights coming from the UK over worries about its new coronavirus strain. Australia and Sweden are preparing to do some of the same. The UK identified a new COVID variant that could spread more quickly than prior strains. It is currently unclear whether the new strain transmits more easily, makes people sicker, or changes the way their immune system responds to the virus if they were already infected or vaccinated. And that's the question. Will the mutation get to the point where it no longer, or the vaccine is not as effective? And I've been reading some stuff on the changes to this virus, and it's pretty significant, some of the changes. It's unclear on whether it makes a person sicker, but it does seem to contribute to being more infectious, which is the reason why many of these places are shut down. They're already being hit, and they're concerned that it will get worse by a new strain. This is one of the reasons why I've been so adamant about doing due diligence, because viruses have a tendency to mutate. And if they're uncontrolled, well, the mutation, I would imagine, has that much more of a propensity to take place because you have more occurrences of the virus. right now in California, they're down, I think the last report I read, to like 100. They're going to start rationing care pretty soon. And this is California. You have other states that are in similar situations in regards to their ICU beds being full or the hospitals being slammed. Look, the mutation is over there, but there's no reason to believe that at some point it will happen here, especially with us being the epicenter. The massive cyber attack that resulted in multiple data breaches at the top federal agencies through a third-party software vendor known as SolarWinds is being leaked to Russia by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In an interview on Friday, Pompeo said this was a very significant effort, and I think it's the case that now we could say pretty clearly this was the Russians that engaged in this activity. I can't say much more as we're still unpacking precisely what it is, and I'm sure some of it will remain classified. On Saturday, President Trump tweeted his first public comments on the issue saying, quote, "The cyber hack is far greater in fake news media than in actuality. I've been fully briefed and everything is well under control. Russia, Russia, Russia is the priority chant when anything happens because lamestream is, for mostly financial reasons, petrified of discussing the possibility that it may be China. It may! Exclamation point. There could also have been a hit on our ridiculous voting machines during the election, which is now obvious that I won big, making it even more corrupted embarrassment for the United States." Tagging Ratcliffe and Pompeo. You know, the wild part about this is Pompeo got on stage and screamed that he lies, cheats, and steals for a living. And so Pompeo is not necessarily the guy I go to for honesty and truth in government. If you remember, Pompeo was also the guy when they murdered Soleimani, or assassinated Soleimani, depending upon how you want to categorize it. But after the killing, basically said there was an imminent attack, but we don't know when. It's like, wait, but if it's imminent, doesn't that mean immediate? It's like you're trapped by the vocabulary in and of itself, and you still went with it anyway. Trump also lies as easily as he breathes. So where do you go with this, right? And herein lies the problem when you don't necessarily have honesty and integrity in your government, especially in the way that they report news. Shane, do you have any comments on that one? We've went through a few of the stories, but you've talked about this, and you've been really good at explaining how they are basically guessing. I mean, they basically see something, and then they say, okay, that was the Russians because that has a signature that's associated with the Russians. And it's like, but you don't know that. And not only do you not know that, you don't even have necessarily proof of that. I mean, this goes to like the CrowdStrike stuff, where the CEO of CrowdStrike, they bury in the report that the data wasn't exfiltrated. They had no proof that the data was taken out. It didn't stop Schiff from acting as if they did and acting as if they knew exactly what happened. And I'm making the point that the same thing is probably true here. These guys get the stenographers, right? It's not that they see the evidence, it's just they're told and they run with it. And I have problems with that because the Russiagate stuff in and of itself is problematic in regards to the tension that it created between the two countries. And it seems that Biden is coming in, and I don't think that tension is going anywhere. I think with all of these, let's say, angry Democrats that have misplaced anger at Russia, believing that they were responsible for Donald Trump winning the race, that is going to ride right in with Joe Biden. And I think that is very disconcerting. What do you think, Shane?
It's true. It is. We're like the dude with roid rage at a bar who keeps trying to pick fights with people, and it's a little bit embarrassing. And yeah, no. So I mean, a couple of different angles we can come at this from, and I won't I'll try to take not too long here. John Henry, the CSO, Chief Strategic Officer of CrowdStrike, former Executive Assistant Director at the FBI. They have pretty high up there a direct link to intelligence. What these companies will do broadly, and CrowdStrike is central here because of their role in the 2016 DNC hack. They will, using circumstantial evidence, tell their clients who they think did something, and they have to guess who based on the what and the how. And it gets murky because, immediately, because, it's not like there's a name tag or a lapel on the malware. They can't just figure that out. They've got to look at, what tactics were used, what the specific code was, if that code is publicly available, if it's associated with the actions of other previous instances, if it's associated with other instances of the malware being used. And they put that stuff together, and then they'll throw in their sort of, using that circumstantial evidence, they'll throw in their assumption about who's actually doing what. And where it gets even murkier is when the companies have an incentive to say that it's a specific party. So I would argue that CrowdStrike, specifically back in 2016, had an incentive to say that it was Russia doing the hacking, not China, not another country, but Russia specifically. On the one hand, because that increases the apparent size of the threat and justifies DNC and other companies spending more money on entities like CrowdStrike, non-CrowdStrike specifically. And on the other hand, it's because that simply fit the DNC's narrative. This is at the same time as in the State Department, there was this sort of anti-Russian hoax, the whole Russiagate, the seeds of Russiagate brewing in the Clinton camp. And it was of a piece on the back end, assuming that there was some communication there, to associate any threat with the Russians, to associate any breach, anything like that with the Russians. And that holds true to this day. It's not just CrowdStrike. Anytime you're having to use circumstantial evidence, anytime you're having to go on inferences, basically, not deductions, but implication, then that introduces some subjectivity. And it seems to me that it's in the best/worst interests of the establishment intelligence complex to blame Russia on this going into 2021. Blaming China wouldn't probably be as good for Biden as blaming Russia. And frankly, it could go either way, or to a non-nation state actor. They keep assuming that it's a nation state actor based on the targets, but you could just have a private group of dedicated hackers who are trying to get access to state secrets, which they can then, for instance, sell on the black market or try to sell to the highest bidder, et cetera. Like there are other potentials than that this is that this is a nation state doing this stuff. There are other options than that.
They're making assumptions. And I mean, all of this is an assumption.
They keep blaming it on them.
Yeah, and the media just runs with the assumption. Like, they don't even say, hey, what did you guys use to nail down this to ensure that this is indeed the Russians? I've never even heard that.
Nobody's asking that. Nobody. I think literally Glenn Greenwald is the only independent party I've seen on a somewhat high level
just
asking that question. Okay, and Aaron Maté too.
Yeah, it's just them two. I mean, Aaron Maté excoriated Verizon when these guys were able to meet one another. And Aaron Maté was kind of making the point about the intelligence that these guys were using to come to the conclusion. And he was like, this is what you guys were using? This is not even like, this is just a perspective of the person. This is not a determinative thing. And yet, we get it all the time, as if these things this is a flat fact, what it is. Yeah, I would have no issue if they said we have suspicions of, but that's not the way this argument goes. This argument goes as a flat fact. This is what's taking place. Boris Johnson, if you remember when the Scripps were poisoned, Boris Johnson goes to Pordendown, says, well, the guy from Pordendown told me that the Russians did it. Then the guy from Pordendown was like, I don't know why he said that. I don't know why he said that. Yeah, I do think these guys take political positions in going after countries that they consider enemies. So
naturally, yes, that's arguably what they get. Yeah, it's arguably what they get paid to do anyway.
Right. All right. So former vice president candidate Sarah Palin has publicly changed her position on WikiLeaks. During the 2008 election, while she was running for VP under John McCain, WikiLeaks published Palin's hacked emails. The emails did not contain anything scandalous, but news organizations called for volunteers to help reporters dig through them. Despite the history, Palin has just released a video supporting the pardon of Assange. This video is amazing. Let's play the clip.
Hey, this is Sarah Palin up in Alaska, and I am the first one to admit when I make a mistake. I admit that I made a mistake some years ago not supporting Julian Assange, thinking that he was a bad guy, that he leaked material that perhaps he shouldn't, and I've learned a lot since then. And I think Julian did the right thing, and Julian did us all a favor in America, did the world a favor by fighting for what he believed was right. And ultimately, he's been proven to be right. He deserves a pardon.
Wow. That is stunning. Who talked to Sarah Palin to change her mind on this? Aren't you fascinated by that? What do you think, Shade? Like, I'm really fascinated by who had this conversation with her. Somebody had to have talked to her for her to come to this conclusion.
That's what I was thinking when I first heard this too, and I was first watching this clip. Just mainly because of like the tone in her voice, it's a little bit awkward and stilted, and like she feels like she has to say it, like like somebody asked her to say it, and like it's the politically expedient thing to do. But I'm not complaining. Pretty cool to see it happening.
Astonishing glad to see it happen. I was going to run the clip myself. So, no, this is perfect, man. I shout out to Sarah Palin. Sarah Palin, and let's do this. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Sarah Palin had like an approval rating of like 70% when they went to get her originally. And the reason she had that approval rating of 7% because it was like a UBI. Alaska was giving back some of the oil revenue basically to the people of Alaska. And when you give people money that those people feel they deserve because it's their state, they live there, they work there, well, those people are happy. And those people appreciate you when you do that. Hence, her approval rating. Her approval rating didn't start taking a hit till she started running in the election with John McCain. But Sarah Palin, broken clock, twice right. Let's do this. Let's take a break. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones with the historical context to tie them together? Well, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host, Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming us on, give us a like and definitely share that audio and video. And if there's a potential for subscription, make sure you hit that button. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can send us a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. But joining us, one of our great guests, one of my favorite guests actually, Chuck Zlatkin, Legislative and Political Director for the New York Metro and Postal Union, APWU. Chuck, welcome back to the show, man. How's it going?
All right, thank you very much for having me back on. I hope you guys are doing well. Lots of news regarding the Postal Service. I don't know if any of it is good. So
well, let's go there. Let's start there. Okay. So you sent us an email. Now, what is the latest going on from the standpoint of the Postal Service?
Okay, well, a couple of things. I mean, we need to talk about Trump nominating Republican Roy A. Bernardi, the former mayor of Syracuse, New York, to the Postal Board of Governors. What he's trying to do in his lame duck period here that would assure a Republican majority for the Postal Board of Governors into the Biden years, which would be a real boost for Postmaster General Louis DeJoy staying in there. Also, the other fact is that because of what DeJoy has done with his policies to cut back a service that was thwarted temporarily through the election, the fact of the matter is that this is the peak season for the Postal Service, the holiday season, and the fact that what these cutbacks have done to them, slowing the mail, and the fact that, postal workers, essential workers are not immune to the virus, the post office is swamped. Adding to that FedEx and UPS, who always put their mail into the U.S. mail for delivery, the last mile, are doing it in record amounts at this point because maybe they're busy delivering the vaccine and decided to let the Postal Service. The Postal Service at this point is swamped. I've talked to members who are working in these large facilities. They're not supposed to work more than 12 hours a day, but they're being asked to work 14, 16 hours a day to get this mail out. And all of this stuff that's going on when DeJoy took office, he was named in May, took office in June 15th, in the midst of a pandemic, knowing, again, that postal workers would be affected like everybody else, and also the fact that there would be a record volume of mail because of the pandemic, people depending on the Postal Service. He went ahead and instituted all of these cuts to slow the mail, to bring it to this point now. And I know the last time, or maybe the previous time I was on, I talked about the fact that you cannot privatize the Postal Service when it has a 91% approval rating by the American public. But if you can knock that down, destroy the reputation of the Postal Service and the American public, it will be easier to bring about privatization. And unfortunately, I think that's what's happening right now.
And is that based on polling, or is that just based on how you see things going, like the overtime, the inability to deliver packages, or is there actual polling showing that number dropping, John?
Well, no, the polling isn't going to take place yet until after this series, this season. But the reality is, if people are not getting their medication on time, if people's Christmas gifts are not delivered before Christmas or whatever, they're going to have resentment. Who's the resentment going to go towards? It's going to go towards the Postal Service. Their approval of the Postal Service and faith in the Postal Service wasn't based on the fact that, we have good personalities and they liked our uniforms. It's because we provided a service. We were always there. We delivered the mail on time. We could be counted on. And if that's damaged, it's not based on polling, but I can't see people. I just spoke with someone yesterday whose medication that he relies on, he received a week late. I also spoke to, members of our union who were working extraordinary hours and said that they're swamped in packages. This isn't an accident. This is a plan. Remember now, DeJoy was considered a business genius. His expertise is in logistics. You don't come in and all of a sudden do all of this stuff by accident. And you can challenge me and say that what I'm looking at might be conspiratorial or whatever. But everybody was saying, "Oh, he's in there to help Trump by slowing the ballots and whatever." Postal Service delivered 65 million ballots on time. There was some that weren't. That's always going to happen. But the reality is we did the job. We did the job with less people. We did the job with all these things against us. But what's taking place now in this holiday season is unbelievable. The volume is way up. They did not hire people for this period of time. They didn't reinstitute all of these slowdown changes because there were 12 lawsuits against the Postal Service and DeJoy. They fought every one of them trying to keep these delaying tactics in there, and it's a crisis, and it would be dishonest of me to come on here and not say to people, this is what's going on, because they're going to, if they haven't seen the impact already with delayed mail, it's going to even be worse through this season, and that's the truth. And I totally blame Postmaster General Louis DeJoy, who's staying on. He doesn't leave because Trump is leaving. He brought in his top cronies to come in a high-paying position. He's planning to stay in there and fulfill his goal, which is to prepare the Postal Service for privatization.
Yeah, Chuck, to back you up on this, Republicans, this is dogma for them. I mean, they're destroy Social Security, destroy Medicare, destroy anything for the most part that's dealing with collective action. And this has been something that's in their playbook, get massive amounts of debt and then turn around and say, oh, now we have to cut programs that we've had all of this debt added to the government itself. This is stuff that these guys have been doing for decades. This was like Ronald Reagan's idea. I mean, in regards to this notion of drowning the government in debt. From the standpoint of the Postal Service itself, though, what is the response to this? Because I agree with you. If medication stops being delivered, if mail doesn't get delivered on time, the public itself, I don't think, is of the mind to know that it is because policy changes were made to cripple the post office. I don't think they're there. And so I get where you're coming from. You're basically saying the public is not necessarily going to understand all of the internal politics of everything that's going on. They're just going to say the post office is not doing their job. Yes, I think they're snazzy dressers, personally. But you're right. It's the service. It's the fact that they're extraordinarily good at what they do. And they do it well. And they don't necessarily get a huge amount of accolades for doing that job well. What is the response to this? Meaning, what can postal workers do? Or what is the union going to do? Like, what's the pushback against this? Or is there pushback against this? Is this one of those things that has to be bared? Or is there a response?
Well, at this point, the union was hoping if we can stop this nomination of Bernardi, then it opens up the possibility that President-elect Biden will have three picks, which would give the Democrats the majority of the Postal Board of Governors, and they're the only ones who can get rid of DeJoy. That's what needs to happen. We need to have people on the Postal Board of Governors that are for a public postal service get in there, assess what Joy is doing, and get him the hell out and put in somebody who will actually be in charge of a public postal service for what the people need and desire. So that's what postal workers and the unions are working on, and calling for people to reach out to their legislators or call the White House directly on January 20th. So that's why we're fighting to stop the Bernardi pick. But then again, right now you have 6 members of the Postal Board of Governors, all white men. None of them with any connection whatsoever to having any experience with the Postal Service. This was like either put in there as payoffs or to bring about policy changes that are negative. It really doesn't matter what their motive is. It's what they actually do. So the hope is that Biden will make good on his campaign promises. But then again, we've seen by what his other picks are. I mean, he could put in, African American, other minorities in there, rural people in there who will still carry out the same policies. We have to need good people to be appointed to the Postal Board of Governors and fulfill what their oath is and what their job is, and get this, this cancer in DeJoy out of the Postal Service. Get somebody in there who cares about maintaining the Postal Service and serving the American people, which is what our mandate is, and then we can get going. Because at this point, postal workers, they're making a living, they're concerned about that, they're committed to doing their job, and the frustration that postal workers are facing because of this overwhelming volume, lack of enough employees, and a postmaster general who doesn't give a damn about serving the American people or the postal workers. DeJoy must go. If he won't resign, he needs to be fired, and the only one who can do that is the Postal Board of Governors, and that's why we need Biden to fill the remaining vacancies with people who care about the Postal Service and care about postal workers, and then we'll have been successful.
Chuck,
thank you for joining us. Yeah, we're about out of time, but I appreciate you being with us here.
All right, thank you very much.
Those listening, that was the voice of Chuck Zlatkin, Legislative and Political Director for New York Metro Area Postal Union. That's APWU. You can keep up with Chuck and his work with the New York APWU on Twitter at Chuck Zlatkin. And that's CHUCK as normal, and then ZLATKIN, Chuck Zlatkin on Twitter. We're going into a break. We will be back in just a minute with Bruno Franco from Frank Analysis. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Feeling kind of blue, but maybe also kind of red, and kind of purple, and kind of alone? You've got a friend on Radio Sputnik. Tune into Political Misfits from 12 to 2 Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, for news, politics, and culture without the two-party bias. Catch us daily on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Or find us on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you get your news.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Franco. We are joined by Bruno Franco, independent political analyst, commentator, and host of Frank Analysis and HMO podcast. That's the Hear Me Out podcast. By the way, you can follow Franco on Twitter. Check him out at B43Franco. That's the letter B, the numbers 4 and 3, Franco. And you can also check him out on YouTube at Frank Analysis and HMO podcast. That's Hear Me Out podcast. Bruno, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me on. I've been listening to you guys for a while. I've been subscribed to Jamarl Thomas's channel since like 2018, so it's a great honor to be here. It's unbelievable.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's very cool to have you. All right, let's get right into it. You have a channel. I was watching one of your videos the other day. I was watching a good long overview of Avril Haines, and specifically you were going into Event 201, which I think gets misreported on a lot, but it's interesting to look at as an early sort of preparatory event for a pandemic like this. And some of the stuff that the people who are who were taking place in that event, who were on the panel that was acting out the scenario that was described in Event 201, including Avril Haines, started to say some stuff that sounds a little bit spooky. And we've seen some of that come to pass. Now, some people have called this sort of preparation for the pandemic, not just in terms of preparing for a possible pandemic, but some people were getting pretty conspiratorial about it and saying that they were planning this thing out. I'm not going to get into that territory, but I think as people are reporting on it, if people are saying that, part of what gets left out is some of the stuff that people were saying that has indeed come to pass. And again, Avril Haines, Biden's pick for Director of National Intelligence. I thought you did a great overview of some of her background, her connections, and some of the weirder stuff that she was saying during that event. Can you just go into that for a minute? Can you just set us up? What was Event 201 from your perspective? And who is Avril Haines? Yeah. What's her background? Yeah, sure. And what are you concerned about there, Bruno?
Yeah, first I just want to mention I'm not here to push any narrative. Like, I'm not here to say that this is like a bioweapon. I'm not here to say that this was like that they were planning this out. I'm just here to say that a lot of the stuff that was said there has come to pass. Like, we're seeing it happen now. So whether they had something like this planned out, like manufacturing people's consent, like censoring certain information that they don't want the public to know, they've had stuff like this planned out for a long time. So for people who don't know what Event 201 is, it's a exercise that was hosted by the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security, and it was in partnership with the World Economic Forum, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Johnson & Johnson, and there were many high-ranking officials of the WHO, the CDC, people like George Gao, who's a virologist and director of the Chinese CDC. And it was supposed to be an exercise of how prepared we are for a pandemic. Now, the event was held in 2019, October 2019, a year ago, before the actual pandemic hit. And in it, they talked about how they were going to have the government and social media companies work together to block misinformation and take down channels. So a lot, like we're seeing them take down channels that are challenging the mainstream narrative about COVID. Like they took down the Last American Vagabonds channel. They took down the Conscious Resistance with Derek Bros. And for other channels that even talk about like COVID or the vaccine, they have to put like underneath the video, like a link to the CDC or a link to Wikipedia. Even when you talk about the election, they also put like a link to like AP. And that's some of the stuff that they talked about in this event. Like they had to work with some telecommunications companies or companies that people trust. Information that quote unquote they want people to know. They didn't say like what objective information that they want people to know. They said the information that they want people to know. And I think that's something that people need to be looking into. And Avril Haines, she already has a history of trying to cover up some of the shady stuff that the US has done. So I'm quoting here from Business Insider from an article called Biden Picks a Spy Chief Who Played a Role in the Obama Drone War Program, which says that some progressives and critics have accused Haines of complicity in the CIA's use of torture or enhanced interrogation techniques after 9/11. She recommended Gina Haspel for CIA director, though Haspel has been implicated in the agency's use of torture.
Bloody Gina Haspel. Bloody Gina.
Yeah.
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 And by the way, torture, and then hid the tapes. She got caught destroying the tapes on torture. But please, keep going.
Yeah. So it goes on to say that Haines is also remembered for redacting the Senate Intelligence Committee's report on the use of torture and for approving a panel that ultimately decided not to reprimand the CIA personnel who spied on the committee's investigators. So again, like she has a history to hide or suppress information from the public. So we should be questioning why they're trying so hard to hide information about.
You know, I think the sad truth is that on issues of national defense, these guys basically agree. And I think that's the sad truth. I mean, to be honest, Democrats have seemed far more hawkish than Republicans on a lot of this stuff. I mean, and it didn't used to always be that way. Republicans used to castigate Democrats as weak, et cetera, in which case these guys would get reflexive in pushing back. But I don't think this is reflexive anymore. Obama was a hawk. Clinton would have been a hawk. And Joe Biden will be a hawk. And I think that's unfortunate, especially when you're getting into like the intelligence services and everything else. Look, whatever you want to think of Trump, and clearly I don't think much of Trump. He didn't start any new wars. He could have sleepwalked into one, yes, but he didn't start any new ones. Frank, from the standpoint of Avril, you said she gave a testimony, or she gave basically a recommendation that they not, or that they hide the information based on the torture reports?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing. I remember, and by the way, you said also the spying on Congress. Now, this was Brennan, correct?
At the time, I believe I don't know if I think she was there during the when Pompeo and the torturing took place under the George Bush administration. So she was there during the transition from the Bush to Obama administration. Like, I'm not.
Okay, we're having a little bit of difficulty with the thing. It seems like I think you're blinking out on us. So let's see if we can.
One quick thing here is, one quick thing here is, we're going to try calling you back, Bruno. In case you're listening to us right now, you keep blinking out. We keep losing connection with you, losing some reception here. I see we called you on your phone. There's a chance. I think Andre will work with you to try to see if we can get you on. 'Cause it's a fascinating conversation, interesting topic. And I mean, a couple other things we haven't mentioned here. For one thing, Avril Haines was a consultant with Palantir. She was an advisor to them. She says that she was advising them on like diversity issues, like the quota of women that they were bringing in or something like this, becoming a more diverse organization. But just the fact that she was consulting with Palantir, a little bit worrying, just in itself. Peter, co-founded by Peter Thiel, shady organization, a private company that works closely with the government and with intelligence agencies, basically to do pre-crime-like stuff, building out networks of people, creating tools for intelligence officials to quickly sort through and search through a lot of data about you and me, frankly, about just American citizens, in order to figure out who's likely to commit crimes, and in the process, again, do the whole Philip K. Dick pre-crime thing to some extent, where they try to figure out in advance who is most likely to commit crimes, worrying if ever there was one. So she was a consultant with them, and I'm just trying to see if we have him back on. Bruno, do we have you with us?
Yeah. It sounds like you guys are talking about her connection with Palantir and the role that Palantir has served before on predictive policing, right? Is that what you guys were just talking about?
That's exactly what I picked up. I was just going over some of her other connections, some of her other relationship with the national intelligence establishment. Yeah, go back into it, please, Bruno.
Yeah. So this is from LeeRockwell.com. This individual interviewed Whitney Webb. She knows way more about this topic. So Palantir, for people who don't know, is a company is a company that was given the contract to come up with the vaccine allocation strategy and determine the critical population each vaccine should be distributed to. Palantir was founded by Peter Thiel and was initially funded by QTL, the CIA's venture capital arm, and the CIA client for the first 3 years of its existence. At present, Palantir is a contractor for 17 U.S. intelligence agencies and also the U.S. military. The company is also in charge of COVID-19 data under the auspices of the HHS. And when she worked at Palantir, she was the consultant. So.
Yeah.
Oh man, this is beautiful. Yeah. No, we keep Bruno. I'm sorry, man. We've got to pick you back up some other day and try to figure out what was causing this problem.
Yeah, because that's a tough one. It keeps blinking out.
Yeah, fascinating conversation.
Extremely interesting.
100%. Yeah, we wish we could continue the conversation. And maybe we can try him on some other means, and we'll see if we can get him back on. But anybody in the audience knows exactly what we're talking about. We keep dropping him out. And I want to get back. I believe he's talking when he says QTL. He's talking about InQtel, the American not-for-profit venture capital firm based in Arlington, Virginia, invests in high-tech companies to keep the CIA. I'm quoting just from Wikipedia here, and other intelligence agencies equipped with the latest in information technology in support of U.S. intelligence capability. Again, like he's saying, they're effectively the CIA, along with other intel agencies, venture capital firm. I've dealt with them in the past. I think just in the past doing research on Palantir, doing research on Palantir's connections, and he's absolutely right that yes, they're farmed out to invest in private companies. They decided to go in with Palantir CEO Alex Karp, co-founded by Peter Thiel back in, I believe it was 2003. Thiel, Karp, and a handful of others. And yeah, we've reported on them in the past, actually. Anyway, Bruno, let's try this one last time. Bruno, are you there with us now?
Yeah, I'm on my phone this time rather than on my laptop. So
okay, let's get back into it. Yeah, different audio, but I think this will be a little bit more secure. What were you saying there?
Were you guys? Did you guys mention how she was a consultant for diversity? Did you guys catch that part when I was here?
I briefly brought that up. Yes.
Yeah. So she probably had a say in which populations are going to receive the vaccine first. And we know that they're pushing, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have talked about this, and there's also historical Black colleges and universities that have programs on testing the vaccine on their students. They want to test. They want people, poor Black and brown people, to receive the vaccine first because they say that these are the most sensitive populations.
And let's go back. We've got about a minute before we need to go into a break. But real quick, Bruno, why do you say that she would be in charge of choosing which members of the population get the vaccine?
She was the consultant for diversity for Palantir. So she is the one. She is the her role is to ensure that the company and the culture and the practices are fair and inclusive. So she has a say on like, okay, which populations are most sensitive for like for being infected with COVID, which ones we have to treat first, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think you're in part saying that because the claim here is that Palantir work was farmed out to them. They were put partially in charge of operations with administering Operation Warp Speed. Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, that's it.
All right, let's try this. We're going to go into a break. We will be back on the other side of this break continuing to talk with Bruno Franco. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Radio Sputnik. We speak your language. Find us at SputnikNews.com.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live from our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us with a far better connection is Bruno Franco, independent political analyst, commentator, and host of Frank Analysis, and HMOI, Hear Me Out podcast. Bruno, again, man, welcome to the show, man. Let's get into a fight that has been taking place. And I have to be honest, I think it's gotten to be an embarrassing spectacle at this point. What started off as a great idea, meaning this notion of primarying Pelosi, not primary Pelosi, but you know what I mean, basically putting Pelosi, if Pelosi wants to be Speaker of the House, then Pelosi, who's a capitalist, and understand that when you want something, it costs. Well, it cost a Medicare for all vote. It cost something else. There should be real material costs for Pelosi to get that vote, especially now. AOC lost her seats, so she didn't even get the committee seats. The Democratic Party, DCCC, DSCC, have taken steps to basically prevent people like her from getting in Congress. When we talk about the Civil War and the Democratic Party, that's just one element of it, where they basically was like any group that works with a lefty to take out an incumbent will be blacklisted. This didn't happen, however, to Kennedy when he was going against Marley. So that gets across this notion of a certain level of hypocrisy. It wasn't that the Democratic Party was being nice to lefties just because lefties were being subservient to the Democratic Party. And a policy, honestly, that should have been taken with Joe Biden. Basically, if Joe Biden wants that vote, we're in the middle of a pandemic, Joe Biden needs to support Medicare for all, at the very least Medicare for all with COVID. But no, lefties didn't push him on that, and now it's on Pelosi. Why do you think this has become a spectacle? I mean, because, look, the original idea was good, but eventually it became really divisive. I mean, the attacks back and forth where both sides are just scarring and just scraping at each other. And it's like you're watching on Twitter, and one side says, well, this guy said that. And the other side said, well, you said that. And at that point, the entire point of it, which was a really good idea originally, gets lost. What happened?
it became a spectacle, Jamarl, because of the person who's proposing the idea, and that's Jimmy Dore. And people hate Jimmy Dore. They hate Jimmy Dore because of his quote unquote controversial takes, even though it's just him raising his voice. It's him proposing what you call politics 101 strategies of withholding your vote until they propose something that you want. That's all he's doing. But because he has been going against the narratives that TYT has been pushing out, like Russiagate, the OPCW reports in Syria, they've been jealous of him for proposing this plan, and so it's become an attack on the character. And just like look at the tweets that people like Emma Vigilant and Anna Kasparian have been putting out there. It has barely to do with Medicare for all, and it has more to do with attacking Jimmy Dore's character and protecting politicians like AOC. Like, isn't it ridiculous?
Well, yes, but kind of. I mean, it depends on how you look at that, right? I mean, Dore coming out saying AOC was standing between you and your healthcare is dishonest. By the same token, him hitting her saying, look, you guys need to stand up for something is correct. And so I don't think I'm not seeing this from this point of view of everybody's just attacking Dore. I agree with you from the standpoint of the Cedars of the world, what's his name? The other one, the other disgusting person. I can't think of his name right now. But they attack him relentlessly. And so I think part of it does have to do with the messenger. So I think that's fair. If this message came from somebody else, do you think they would have this much resistance against it?
Yeah. I was just about to say, if the message came from somebody else, they would have been praising it. If it was AOC who came up with this plan, they would have been praising it and said that this is the best idea in the world. But because it's Jimmy Dore, that's why they turn it into this controversial issue when it shouldn't be. Like, we're in a pandemic right now. People are suffering. People have lost their health insurance. People are dying. People have gone months without a stimulus, and we need Medicare for all now more than ever. Like we're done waiting for them to come up with a plan or solution. Like the plan, like we need it now. And the best way to do it is to use your leverage, which is your vote, if you're a congressperson, and withhold your vote from voting for Nancy Pelosi until she agrees to put Medicare for all up for a vote.
Politics 101.
Okay, so we can go back and forth on this. In some sense, I definitely agree. But why do you think they're focusing on? Obviously, he's the one who brought it up. But why do you think there's this negative backlog of animosity towards Jimmy Dore? What positions has he taken in terms of the sort of high school cliquishness that goes on in politics? What has he done wrong in the past that would cause them to single him out, other than proposing this, which again, maybe they just don't want him to get the credit for it. But yeah, what do you see there, Bruno?
Well, they consider it. So they, as in like Sam Cedar, TYT, they think it that it hurts the movement to attack the Democratic Party, which Jimmy Dore does a lot. And I think sometimes he does do it too much to the point where it distracts on focusing on other issues like foreign policy or going deep into civil liberties. But I mean, it's still necessary. Jimmy Dore points out things that are not obvious on the left, which is that the Democrats are not your friend. They're owned by the same people who own the Republicans. And so there are the people that are pretending to be your friends. And so that needs to be called out, and Jimmy Dore does that. And that angers people like Cedar, who wanted Hillary Clinton to be president, who wanted Joe Biden to be president, because he sees it as like harm reduction. Jimmy Dore sees harm reduction by pointing out things that aren't obvious to the left, and that's that the Democrats, just as much as the Republicans, are not your friend.
It seems, just to interject briefly, it seems like this is another instance of like incrementalism versus revolution, tearing the left apart in some sense, where it's not about our society at large. This time it's about the left as a movement, or the Democratic Party, or whatever, the vehicle for pushing left-wing politics, where it seems like the Sam Cedars are wanting something a little bit more incremental, and then the revolutionary folks are, and I'm using sort of a small R revolutionary. They're saying that is useless, and that you're effectively just giving concessions to the corporate systems, the system as it is. And then the reformists are calling the revolutionaries crazy. They're blaming them for attacking their own, and they're saying that it's basically a useless strategy, that you're not going to be able to actually get progress that way when you're continuing to try to undercut your own move. I'm probably off base. You're probably you guys are both going to agree with me.
No, you're right. I mean,
what do you
you're
think?
close. I mean, look, both sides have been attacking each other. Let's be honest. And you can hit AOC. I hit AOC in my own videos, right? Especially with this notion of, oh, I want a committee seat. And you didn't get the committee seat. These guys can't stand you. AOC was talking about leaving politics. It was that bad. I don't know if you've seen that interview where she was like, hey, we're not the enemy, etc., which gets across the level of vitriol that she was taking from Democrats. And so it's like, at some point, she needs to get, and I got to be honest, the lefties need to get that they're not your friends. They're not your buddies. They're not working in your interests, which is why I think, for whatever Doer's faults, he does hit upon something that's right, which is a certain degree of emotional anger with the way the system is. And I think the anger is legitimate. But like you said, Shane, from the Cedars of the world, their thought is harm reduction. So it's, yeah, you got to vote for Biden. You got to vote for Clinton. It doesn't matter that it perpetuates the system the way it is. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that the system is game. Doesn't matter that they cheated Sand. None of that stuff matters. It's just one concentration camp less. And that's the way they look at the politics. Am I wrong, Bruno? I mean, this is basically this kind of divide, right?
Yeah, but what they don't realize, and you've done a great job of pointing this out on your show for many years, Jamarl, is that each election year, we get more concentration camps. So it's like, first it's like 19 versus 21. Then the next election, it's like 25 versus 30. Then the election after that, it's like 70 versus 100. And so it's like, the thing to do is to just withhold your vote. Like, that's your leverage. Like, we're not going to put up with more concentration camps, because keep adding more concentration camps every election. So, I mean,
and what's even weirder about
when
it,
you say concentration camp, what do you mean?
Well,
real quick,
Sam
Bruno,
Cedar one time made this allegory to one concentration camp less. Somebody called in. It was like, hey, if somebody voted for one concentration camp less, you'd be okay for it. And Cedar was like, yes. The point that they were getting at is, if you're putting in a Biden or you're putting in a Clinton, basically you're talking about maintaining a system with the way that particular system is, that is only incrementally different. And every 4 years, it gets worse. They move further and further to the right. So Obama, who calls himself a Republican in the 90s, gets cast as hope and change in 2008. And, look at Biden right now. You have Joe Biden, who's basically going to be president of the United States. He is out of sync with pretty much everything from the standpoint of the country. And yet, there he is nonetheless. The party moves further and further to the right. That's the point. And, by the way, each generation thinks it's normal. So it's like each successive generation gets accustomed to wherever they are, and they get soaked in it. You know what I mean? It's like the people think that this is the normal way of politics. And unfortunately, I think we lose in this. Bruno, from your standpoint, how do we get, and maybe that's the wrong question. I was going to ask you, for the most part, how is it that we can have these conversations, these arguments, without them turning into spectacles? Because I got to be honest, what started off as a good idea it's like the idea in and of itself became the argument. Does that make sense? It's like the personalities involved became the fight. Like right now, Cenk Uygur is trending on Twitter.
Yeah.
It's like, come on, right? Yeah. How do we have these fights on the left without these things turning into spectacles like this?
Just be as objective as you can. Like, try to take your feelings out of it as much as you can. Just be like, look, they're calling out Jimmy Dore for getting a $2 million house. Just tell him the house that he got is his family's home. Like, it's on Seth Zamorano's side, and you're going to be talking about that when Cenk Uygur and Anna Kasparian are more wealthy than Jimmy Dore, and TYT takes money from Katzenberg and and Sam Cedar has an MSNBC contract, so he is not going to say anything that goes against, that's going to harm that contract. Like why? And weren't you just defending Bernie Sanders for getting a vacation home? Like, just point out like what they're missing here, like their hypocrisy. Like, you can be objective about it by pointing it out, rather than resulting in like insults or like these like you've seen them on Twitter, like people resulting to like insults and like pee poo poo jokes. Stay away.
Look, from my standpoint, it just seems like the attacks were coming from both sides, and that the levels of discussion for the most part just got really off the rails. And what started as a great idea, and I really wish everybody would have pushed that idea, ends up becoming a food fight on the left. And that's unfortunate, man, because it really is a good idea. Bruno Franco is an independent political analyst, commentator, and host of Frank Analysis and HMOI, Hear Me Out podcast. You can follow Franco on Twitter at B43Franco and on YouTube at Frank Analysis and HMOI, Hear Me Out podcast. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for the last hour this morning of the most disruptive show covering news and events across our divided states as well as across the surface of our divided globe. In the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Going into the headlines, in COVID news this morning, according to the CDC in the U.S., the total COVID-19 cases as of yesterday reached 17,592,760, with the total deaths standing at 315,260. Again, this is in the U.S. Yesterday added 2,624 new deaths to that total number. Last night, Congress finally agreed on a $900 billion COVID-19 stimulus deal. The deal includes restarting a $300 boost to the federal unemployment insurance benefit, extending eviction moratoriums for renters for an unspecified amount of time with $25 billion in emergency rental assistance, and an up to $600 direct payment to most Americans, plus $600 per child. The size of the payment would be reduced for those earning more than $75,000 in 2019. European Union countries, including France, Germany, Italy, Ireland, and the Netherlands, have all barred some combination of flights, vehicle traffic, trains, and freight coming from the UK. That's over worries about a new coronavirus strain said to be spreading through the United Kingdom. Austria and Sweden are preparing to do the same. The UK identified a new COVID variant that can spread more quickly than prior strains. It is currently unclear whether the new strain transmits more easily, makes people sicker, or changes the way their immune system responds to the virus if they were already infected or vaccinated. In U.S. political news, the massive cyber attack that resulted in multiple data breaches at top federal agencies through a third-party software vendor known as SolarWinds is being linked to Russia by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. In an interview on Friday, Pompeo said, quote, "This was a very significant effort. And I think it's the case that now we can say pretty clearly that this was the Russians that engaged in this activity. I can't say much more as we're still unpacking precisely what it is, and I'm sure some of it will remain classified," end quote. That is convenient. I just want to interject this, and this is usually how it works. They don't tell you what happened or exactly what happened or how they know who did it. And then they say, well, we can't tell you more because it's classified, so you just got to take our word on it. And of course, that's been the case for years now in different forms, really for decades, but I'm just talking about the allegations of cyber attacks from Russia. Anyway, on Saturday, and in a sort of a rebuttal response to this, President Trump tweeted his first public comments on the issue. He said, quote, "The cyber hack is far greater in the fake news media than in actuality. I have been fully briefed and everything is well under control. Russia, Russia, Russia is the priority chant when anything happens because lamestream is, for mostly financial reasons, petrified of discussing the possibility that it may be China. It may. There could also have been a hit on our ridiculous voting machines during the elections, which is now obvious that I won big, making it an even more corrupted embarrassment for the USA," end quote. He tagged Ratcliffe and Pompeo. I'm not sure about it being China, and I'm not definitely not sure that he actually won the election. But, I agree with him on the whole Russia, Russia, Russia thing. They certainly do like to make it about Putin, the Democrats and the intel community, that is. And we'll see. It's increasingly the case that the Republicans are doing the same. So at some point soon, we might have a chorus from both parties and from the beast underlying both parties. And I'm worried in the next couple of years that we're going to be agitating for war, that the United States is going to be agitating for war, because that could clearly lead to millions of lives lost. Anyway, hopefully that doesn't happen. And in some signs to the contrary, let's go to Sarah Palin, former vice presidential candidate, who has publicly changed her position on WikiLeaks. During the 2008 election, while she was running for VP under John McCain, WikiLeaks published Palin's hacked emails. The emails did not contain anything scandalous, but news organizations called for volunteers to help reporters dig through them. Despite the history, Palin just released a video supporting the pardon of Julian Assange. Andre, let's play that clip of Sarah Palin, former Alaskan governor, former vice presidential candidate, recommending that Assange be pardoned.
Hey, this is Sarah Palin up in Alaska, and I am the first one to admit when I make a mistake. I admit that I made a mistake some years ago not supporting Julian Assange, thinking that he was a bad guy, that he leaked material that perhaps he shouldn't, and I've learned a lot since then. And I think Julian did the right thing, and Julian did us all a favor in America, did the world a favor by fighting for what he believed was right. And ultimately, he's been proven to be right. He deserves a pardon.
And again, sort of shocking to hear those words coming out of her mouth in the last big clip. But just to be clear, she thinks he deserves a pardon. Again, the former, I've seen her called the quote-unquote victim of Julian Assange. I'm not sure how that works because he's not the one who actually hacked her emails. He just published them, like news organizations do. But anyway, it's just remarkable to hear those words coming from her mouth. In our next headline, Epstein's former associate, Jean-Luc Brunel, a former associate, again, of deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, was charged on Friday, December 18th, with the, quote, rape of minors, end quote, and, quote, sexual harassment, end quote. Brunel, who worked as a French modeling agent, is accused of engaging in sexual activities with multiple women aged between 15 and 18, with one victim claiming he also trafficked her to Prince Andrew. Specifically drugging. He was drugging women underage and not. The 74-year-old, who has denied any wrongdoing since his arrest, was detained by police at Paris's Charles de Gaulle Airport on Wednesday, December 16th, while preparing to board a flight out to Senegal. So it seems like he was preparing to flee there, effectively. But again, detained by police at the airport before he could do so. This is as French authorities are investigating the legacy of the late Jeffrey Epstein, investigating associates and investigating charges that Epstein and his associates, were doing what Epstein was very clearly doing with sex rings and drugging of underage girls and rape. And hopefully if they keep investigating that stuff, they will do their due diligence. And if there are links to intelligence agencies, if there are links to foreign intelligence services, they'll find them. But I doubt it. We'll see. Anyway, next headline here. China and the EU are racing to strike a trade accord in the final days of the year. Negotiators from Brussels and Beijing have made a breakthrough on access to each other's markets, and the EU's trade chief Valdis Dombrovskis, let's get that one right, will on Monday try to seal the deal with his Chinese counterpart, Liu He, my goodness, the EU-China Comprehensive Agreement on Investment offers safeguards to EU companies offshoring production to China and will make it easier for EU investors to buy Chinese companies and vice versa. China hopes to invest more broadly in the EU's sensitive energy and high-tech sectors, European Union diplomats said. Brussels and Beijing have in the past also presented the deal as a stepping stone towards a broader free trade agreement. Other sectors covered by the deal include air travel, hospitals, water transportation, electric and hydrogen cars, and research and development. Some European politicians have been pressing Brussels to avoid economic and political alignment with China, but instead stop Beijing from undercutting the EU on lower labor and environmental standards. Critics also warn that agreeing to a deal now risks complicating Brussels' effort to team up with U.S. President-elect Joe Biden to confront China on everything from human rights to technological standards. In Hungary, 6 Hungarian opposition parties have announced that they will unite in an effort to unseat Prime Minister Viktor Orban and his ruling Fidesz party in the 2022 national elections. The parties on Sunday formally agreed to coordinate a single joint candidate to oppose Fidesz in each of Hungary's 106 electoral districts and to run on a single electoral list. It will also run on a common platform and hold a primary election to select a joint prime ministerial candidate to run against Orban, who has won 3 consecutive elections, leading the country since 2010. The parties are ideologically disparate and include the liberal Momentum, right-wing Jobbik, and Green Party Dialogue. In a statement, they said their cooperation would not represent a merger, but that they would put aside their differences in pursuit of what they called a, quote, change in era, end quote. I want to come back to that in a minute, but we have our last headline here, tech headline specifically, a short one. Tesla is narrowing the time frame for its full self-driving subscription rollout, with CEO Elon Musk telling his Twitter followers that the pay-per-month package is now due to arrive, quote, early next year, end quote. We'll see what that means, what that does to Tesla's stock, and in general, what that does to the auto industry with like a subscription valet service from your computer. In any event, those are headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So, Jamarl, I want to come back to this one for a second, and then we can take it where we will. Hungary, 6 Hungarian opposition parties uniting to try to take down Viktor Orban, and they're saying that they're going to come up with a unified platform, but they're, like we mentioned in the headline here, they're ideologically disparate, they're ideologically diverse, and usually that means you're going to have a hard time coming to some agreement. So what's probably going to happen, I don't know, we'll see, is what they agree on is that they oppose Viktor Orban, and that's about it. And frankly, that does not make a political consensus. I doubt that, if they manage to take him down, that they're going to be able to effectively lead the country on the other side of that election. Anyway, what's your take? What is your take on headlines in general this morning?
How does that work? So the Green Party gets in with, let's say, the Conservative Party and the maybe the Labor Party. These parties at a certain point get pretty disparate in regards to the differences between the two parties or between the multiple parties. I don't know how that works. Now, it could be that getting rid of Orban matters more than the other stuff, in which case they can kind of hammer out this lowest common denominator agreement. Like right now, in the stimulus package. Well, both parties generally agree on the world as the way the world is, but there was supposed to be some kind of gradient in regards to the negotiation, and they come up with something. So it could be that. It's, all right, here's our platform, and this is what we agree upon as our platform as a united front. But we'll see. That gets a little weird. I kind of want to see that in practice. And one last point. The deal for China, I am enamored by that. That's amazing, right? China has been nailing these deals. And this is exceptional for them. Exceptional for the capitalists who are in the EU, who can basically now go and invest in Chinese companies, or for that matter, send labor to China. So instead of, basically this deal comes across as doing something similar as the deal with the U.S. does, where they can send labor over to China, they can pay them less, and they can fire the workers that are in the EU. This seems like it will be good for the EU from the standpoint of electronics, meaning like some of the tech firms and like Huawei, 5G technologies, all those things, it seems like it would be beneficial for that. But it seems like, with the exception of buying cheaper products, I don't know if this is entirely beneficial to the lower classes in the society. At the very least, it depends on, I guess, the details of this agreement. But it sounds like something similar is going to take place where they're going to just be sending jobs overseas to China, firing the workers in the EU, and shipping those products back into the country. I would need to see the protections more than anything else. But China has been nailing these deals. It's definitely good for China.
The one thing here, and it's always worth getting more guests on to talk about this, in my opinion, new guests with different takes on it particularly, is with China, they have, this is the story, at least internationally, they have a rising middle class that could lead to some political instability at home, but it also means that the value of their labor is going up. That means that they're going to be producing products that cost a bit more because they're having to pay labor more to produce them. And so I'm wondering if it's going to be a little bit more bidirectional in terms of the trade.
I see what you mean. Like it floats upward. The salaries for the people float upward, in which case you have to pay the people more, which in case there's a balance in regards to the cost of labor in the EU versus China.
Yes, and it not being the case that it's merely China manufacturing goods and exporting them to the EU, but they're being traded in both directions. That's all that I'm saying, which would affect what you were saying. But not my expertise. We should get somebody on to talk about it. It is a big deal. And like you're saying, this is the second recent major trade. I mean, I'm about to say coup. They haven't actually done this yet with the EU, but all appearances are that they will. Second major coup in the last couple of months from China's perspective. In a year where China did very well overall. I mean, another way to look at this, we've got to go into a break, but while the U.S., while countries in Europe, basically other major powers were hamstrung, even Russia to a lesser extent than the EU or the US, but by and large, as far as I can tell. We were severely hurt by the pandemic. China shut down early, they shut down hard, and from all appearances, they managed to ride the wave pretty damn well. And so while, this was a liability, this year 2020 was a liability for many other countries, they seem to do just fine. And there are interesting questions about how they're going to capitalize on that, how they already have, what form that capitalization is going to take. Anyway, more to talk about with that later. We'll probably be talking about that. Maybe we can pick this up on the other side of this break, actually. We're going to be joined by Caleb Maupin in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back with Caleb Maupin on the other side of this break.
Fault Lines. Catch all the breaking global, political, and economic news as it happens. Sputnik brings an all-star lineup with expert opinion from some of the biggest names in the news today. Noam Chomsky.
Turkey, U.S. ally, their main goal is to attack the Kurds, the one ground force opposing ISIS. And there have been a kind of a funnel for support of ISIS, not officially, but in practice.
Peter Sunde, co-founder of the Pirate Bay.
We don't have any sort of democratic control over the internet. And I think that we're very naive when we think that the internet itself is intrinsically good. It's not. It's just a very neutral technology that is being used for good things, but more and more being used for evil things.
Icelandic Foreign Minister Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson.
We increased activities in the Keflavik airbase, and that has to do with more activities from the Russian Northern Fleet in the ocean around Iceland, and also, of course, these usual flights of the bombers.
Robert F. Kennedy Jr.
We're the ones that destroyed the government of Libya. We're the ones that putting in a pipeline dispute that helped destroy the government of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. We're the ones who invaded Iraq.
Former U.S. Secretary of Defense William Perry.
The hostile relationship between the United States and Russia today is dangerous for both countries, not because either country would actually want to start a military conflict, but because there's always a danger of blundering.
Sputnik talks to the brightest minds in politics and current affairs to find out what's really happening. Tune in. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Maupin. We are joined by Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
I'm great. Couldn't be better. How are you?
very good to hear. And I hope you're wrong there. I hope your life just keeps getting better, because then you have a sort of upward arc to look forward to. But I'm very glad. I'm just kidding. I'm very glad to hear that you're doing well. Caleb, we were just talking about China on the other side of this break. A couple of mammoth trade deals, one in the past, one in the making. 2020, I would say, was a better year for China than it was for pretty much any other major power in the world. And yet it seems like they're slow, at least on the surface, slow to capitalize on it, slow to sort of take advantage of that upswell. Nevertheless, though, they seem to be doing well, and you can see that in trade. Why do you think we're not seeing more displays of hard power right now from China in terms of, stuff in the South China Sea, the relationship with Taiwan, just broadly looking at this? What do you think their calculus is there, Caleb?
Well, that's just not how China has operated. I think China at this point has one overseas military base in Djibouti, right? And the United States, as you're aware, has over 800. And China just doesn't engage in hard power. That's not how they play the game. China is able to win friends and influence people by building infrastructure, by making favorable trade deals. They just, when it comes to the, asserting their power by invading countries or overthrowing governments, that just doesn't seem to be how China operates. There was the 1978 Kampuchea War. That's probably the last time that you've seen anything that could be described as aggression or interventionism from China.
Caleb, I am really curious on what China becomes. Like 1.3 billion people, the Belt and Road Initiative, they've been putting taking samples from the asteroid. Like Shane said, they have been doing quite exceptional this year. I mean, even the virus itself, if how you deal with the virus shows a certain degree of competence of your government and ability to get things done, they've done well, especially in the negotiations and agreements. With the military bases of the United States, though, if the U.S. tanks and it goes down, my fear is that the military is the thing that they grab onto, and that becomes this kind of last resort of sorts. And my concern is that other countries around the world, especially if they are not, how can I say this? I guess what I'm asking is, if things tank and it becomes a militaristic engagement where the U.S. or whoever gets involved basically use the military as that last resort, it's a weakness, right? I mean, like, part of the reason that the U.S. has those military bases, yes, geopolitical influence, but it's also because of trade. It protects the trading engagements. Do you understand what I'm going here? Like, it's almost like, how does China protect its interests without necessarily having, like you said, bases or showing any level of ability to show hard power in regards to protection of those, of their infrastructure, of their interests?
Well, I think that if you look at the way China has responded to COVID, their strength has been that they're all on the same page as a country. Despite having a lot of different regions, despite having, a lot of different interests in the business sector, et cetera, the whole country was mobilized, and the central government apparatus had the whole country basically on the same page of how we're going to respond to this. Whereas here in the United States, we have had so many different interests. We have had so many different conflicts among our elites, so many different attitudes about what should be done about COVID. The government and the private sector and powerful interests in the United States have not all been on the same page. I think that in itself kind of points to the problem. China has built an apparatus for holding the country together. And that's actually a huge part of the Chinese Communist Party's, strength and the reason it's so widely respected, right? Deng Xiaoping, he used to talk about how before the Chinese Communist Party emerged, China was considered to be a heap of loose sand. And that in many ways you had the local warlords, who fought against the Republic of China and Dr. Sun Yat-sen and Chiang Kai-shek. And it was just, the country had been very, very effectively divided. And this was something that the British Empire had done in order to subjugate China and keep it as a captive market with their opium wars that they waged, as they were able to make the country very, very divided, create a situation where you didn't have a central government. Before the Chinese Communist Party came to power, deaths of malnutrition happened in China all the time. There were mass famines in the 1920s and the 19-teens in China where millions and millions of people died, and they died because of the fact that China didn't have a central government that could mobilize relief. And if there was a drought or weather problems in one region, they didn't have a central government that could bring food in and mobilize relief so that people didn't starve to death. And in some cases, you had areas where food should have been grown that were growing opium poppies. And it was a disaster. And the Chinese Communist Party, their strength is that they have created one central Chinese government. And that's why any attempt to talk about Taiwan independence, any talk about breaking Hong Kong or Tibet or the Uyghur regions out away from China is met by the Chinese public, not by the Chinese leaders necessarily, but by the Chinese public with a huge amount of hostility and a huge amount of anger, because it is burned into the consciousness of China's population that when they were divided, when they were separated, the country was poor, and that the strength of China and the poverty eradication and the economic development has all come about as a result of China being unified and centralized under the leadership of one party.
This is very interesting, Caleb, and I'd like to continue in this vein for at least another minute or so. You were talking about, the heap of loose sand intentionally spurred, like you were saying, by the Brits through colonization. I'm guessing that you're talking about the sort of clan rivalries and the divisions in China. Can you go into the causes of that, what Britain did there, and then through the 20th century, what the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party, did to resolve those conflicts? What were the policies? What were the actions taken, et cetera? It's just an interesting period of history, an interesting thing to look into, and you know about it. So, Caleb, please, if you could.
Oh, well, I mean, there were two opium wars that were waged by the British. When the Chinese government tried to put up tariffs and protect its domestic industries, the response of the British was to wage war against them. And they were called the Opium Wars because one of the main things the British were fighting for was the right to import narcotics into Britain or into China. And those wars were waged. China lost those wars. China was beaten down, and the British moved in. But Germany also had territories that it seized in China. There was the French concession of Shanghai, and that there were many parts of China's territory that were directly seized by European powers. And it was, they talk about a period of national humiliation where China was basically divided up among Western interests. Actually, there were some American forces that were involved. People remember the infamous Boxer Rebellion, where there were kind of Chinese nationalists in like 1900 were going around executing drug dealers. And so the U.S. military was sent to China. And that was the first, I think, U.S. military intervention in China, where we sent the U.S. Marines to put down the Boxer Rebellion in China. And that China was basically subject to this national humiliation. It wasn't able to develop its own industries. It was subjected to basically becoming a captive market, an impoverished country. They called it the sick man of Asia. People talk about how in some of the parks, they actually had signs that said no dogs or Chinese allowed. The parks were only for Europeans, European businessmen, and it was a time of national humiliation. And the turning point, you had the beginning of Chinese nationalism, and Dr. Sun Yat-sen, who started the nationalist KMT movement under the slogan of democracy, independence, and the people's livelihood. People's livelihood kind of vaguely meant socialism, but it wasn't exactly clear. And then you have eventually the Chinese Communist Party, after Sun Yat-sen's death and after Chiang Kai-shek, kind of takes over and starts aligning with the West and persecuting communists and such. You have the Chinese Communist Party taking up the mantle of being the Dr. Sun Yat-sen movement, of being the people fighting for independence and democracy and people's livelihood. And the Chinese Communist Party eventually coming to power after defeating the Japanese invaders and eventually, trying to have a unified government. Eventually the Chinese Communist Party coming to power in 1949 and laying the basis for modern China with industrialization. They were getting help from the Soviet Union for a while, but then there was a pretty ugly falling out where, the Soviet Union wasn't helping them. So, you had, Nixon going to China. You had the reform and opening up with Deng Xiaoping. It's been a long project. And I think the strength of the Chinese Communist Party has really been its ability to change very quickly and change its tactics. In one instance, they're doing, state central planning. In another instance, they're doing more of a market reform. In another instance, they're aligning with the Soviet Union. In another instance, they're aligning with the United States. And that their ability to constantly be readjusting their methods of leadership and constantly testing out new policies, sometimes in a local area first before applying it nationally. That has been their strength, right? The Soviet Union fell because it could not bend. It couldn't bend, so it broke. But the Chinese Communist Party, despite being a very centralized organization, despite having, very clear discipline and all of that, they're able to adjust their policies very quickly for changing circumstances. And that has been a real asset.
Yeah, that has been a strength, to put it mildly. Let's do this. Let's take a break, and I'll bring you back. This is Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We will be back in a moment.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
So Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts and stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined by my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. Joining us is Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Again, Caleb, welcome to the show, man. I want to get into the protests. The protests, yes, but also, let's say silent protests, because the mainstream media is not necessarily showing attention to the protests by the restaurant workers, by the restaurants in New York. But beyond that point, why aren't there more? Now, the reason I say this, I've watched companies and I watch business owners complain completely about their business going under, the unfairness of shutdown orders that are taking place. And, I don't think this is a situation where all of these guys are just capitalists or greedy. I think in many respects, many of these are small businesses. These guys have worked for God knows how long to bring that business into existence. And in one fell swoop, out of commission, especially when the overwhelming majority of the PPP loans basically went to big business. People who basically didn't need it. What do you think about this? I mean, there has to be some pushback on this at some point. And like you said, right now, there's a strike I said it, but there's a strike that's taking place in New York that nobody's paying attention to. That's only going to get worse, right? I mean, that's only going to grow at certain points.
Well, look, I have said from the beginning that it appears that when it comes to the pandemic, there is a big divide about how to handle it, and that it's based on business interests. That the ultra-rich in the United States, the big monopolies like Amazon and Jeff Bezos, like Walmart and the Walton family, their attitude is let's keep locked down as long as we possibly can so that all our competitors go out of business, so that people are stuck shopping from home and ordering from us. Let's stay locked down as long as we can and secure our monopoly. Whereas when it comes to the fracking companies when it comes to restaurant owners, when it comes to the smaller businesses, when it comes to folks like, that are more tied to Donald Trump, like the owners of Hobby Lobby, who had their stores indefinitely closed. Their attitude has been, let's open up as quickly as we possibly can so we don't lose money. We're losing money here. And that approach, that's probably why Donald Trump couldn't bring himself to put on a mask for the first few months of the pandemic. And that's also why we are seeing such a big push to remain locked down from people like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and others. And that it's about financial interest. Now, at the end of the day, COVID-19 is a real problem. You have to have health responses to it. So I don't agree with a lot of what's being said by these people that are open up, immediately, the anti-lockdown crowd. I'm not fully on board with them. But I don't think that the motivations of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos are necessarily pure either. And I think that there is a conflict about profits here, and that is the issue. And the fact that, again, we're not all on the same page as a country. We've got different financial interests looking to use this crisis. Look, Naomi Klein wrote that book, The Shock Doctrine, about disaster capitalism. And I think that we're seeing this. Look, the rich and powerful never let a good crisis go to waste. And I think that this pandemic has been seen as a great opportunity for some of the biggest monopolies to roll over their competitors and secure their rule. Silicon Valley is going to come out of this pandemic stronger than ever. Jeff Bezos and Facebook and Twitter and Google and Apple, they are coming out of this pandemic as a very, very powerful financial force. And the big middle class and the big layers of even upper class people that have kind of been a buffer to the power of this ultra rich faction, their power is going to be greatly reduced coming out of this pandemic. The monopolies of the ultra rich will be very secure. That's pretty clear.
So here's the thing. I agree with you ultimately, but on the one hand, I'll put it like this. On the one hand, we have seen in recent months an unprecedented wave of suppression of speech. As it comes to the news, but just even with the Hunter Biden story, where you literally could not send in a private message a link to the New York Post reporting on the Hunter Biden story. Ridiculous. And again, unprecedented. And I'm worried, of course, that'll set up similar events in the future. It'll act as precedent for similar events in the future. On the one hand, we've had that. On the other hand, you have these waves of antitrust lawsuits where in just the past couple of weeks, in two lawsuits, dozens of states have filed against Google. The Department of Justice, I believe back in September, filed an antitrust lawsuit against Google. So you see this similarly with Facebook, waves of pressure against Facebook. You see tech companies coming under fire here. I have my own take on what exactly is going on there. But Caleb, doesn't that, on the surface at the very least, strike against the notion that tech companies are getting free rein during the pandemic going into 2021?
Well, I think what you have to remember is that, the Department of Justice, that's the Trump administration, right? And a lot of these local governments, that's red states, and this is that lower level of capital that is fighting back against them and is resisting their all-out domination. And that seems to be an aspect of the Trump administration that people kind of overlook, which is that Trump had a hostile relationship. Trump felt that, he was being censored by YouTube and by Twitter, right? He felt that there was bias against conservatives and against his views, that he was being suppressed. And so based on that, I think that in some ways there was a force holding back the power of Silicon Valley. But Biden is going to be in office very soon. And look at very much the fact that, that many people from Silicon Valley are working in the transition team. Facebook, Google, Twitter, they are going to be very, very well positioned. Many people are speculating at this point that not only will Donald Trump lose the presidency in January, but some speculate he may be completely deplatformed. He may actually lose his Twitter account entirely. And people are suspecting that the wave of censorship from Silicon Valley, with the White House now on their side, not holding them back, which is what it's likely to be under Biden. And Biden actually stating throughout his campaign that he believed in more censorship and that he was going to convene an international gathering to combat, quote unquote, disinformation on the internet, and then he was going to team up with NATO allies to crack down on dissident ideas. I think we're going to see way more censorship when the White House changes hands.
Yeah, I think you're right, Caleb. I mean, from their standpoint, these guys are still trying to get Julian Assange, thinking that he's exposing too much information, or the commentary on Twitter or Facebook. The deplatforming thing is disturbing. When it happened to Alex Jones, and you had all of these people on the left screaming, yay! And it's like, what are you screaming about? The deplatforming of him at some point is going to end up being the deplatforming of you. And they don't quite seem to understand that. You know, one of the things from the standpoint of the businesses, what do you, from your point of view, how do you think that should have been handled? I mean, because I agree with you. It's not, the Bezos of the world are going to made like $1 trillion, if I'm not mistaken, like just obscene amounts of wealth. Because it makes sense. If you have 40% of your businesses or your retail go belly up, people have to buy those products somewhere. And if you're a Walmart, if you're Amazon, you have the infrastructure for those things. We just had Chuck Zulakin on talking about the press or the mail being just slaughtered in regards to the amount of work that's being done by the post office. So what should be done? How do you parse the baby in this way to try to come up with some kind of outcome that at the very least doesn't hit small business and protect small business while not necessarily giving this kind of unfair advantage to these larger corporations?
Well, I mean, if you want to talk retrospectively, I mean, what we could have done firstly was, I mean, we all should have been on the same page. There should have been tests available, and the loans and the assistance should have actually gone to small businesses, right? And that loophole where most of the relief money that was supposed to go to small business owners ended up, going through some technicality to big corporations. They figured out, a way to file their paperwork, whatnot, so that they got all the assistance that was supposed to go to small businesses. But that shouldn't have happened. Now, going forward, I mean, we need to all be on the same page, and there needs to be a unified approach, and there needs to be assistance provided to people. Look, I mean, this deal that Congress is coming up with where people are going to get, what, $600 or something? I mean, this is embarrassing. I mean, this is painful. The rich are getting bailed out, and millions of people, working people, small business owners, are being left behind. The population is being left behind. The corporate interests, the military-industrial complex is being taken care of. And this is an absolute disaster. And we're all being told, well, look, it's public health. You got to be shut down. But some people are getting protection and assistance while being shut down, and other people are being left out to dry. And that absolutely must be called out. I mean, it's really unacceptable. I think the calls to raise the issue of Medicare for all now are very urgent, right? During a pandemic, it's very clear that the health of one is the health of all. And when you have a society where people don't have health insurance, when people are not insured, that doesn't just hurt the people that aren't insured. It hurts the whole country. The whole country is suffering from the irrational healthcare policies of the U.S. government right now. And more than ever, now is the time to beat the drum around the issue of Medicare for all. So there are many, many different things. But when it really gets down to it, humans are collective creatures. Nobody exists in a vacuum. We want to pretend that here in the United States. People love to read Atlas Shrugged and pretend that everyone's on their own and it's just, you're an individual and it's all about you all alone. But at the end of the day, human beings are collective creatures. Every product in every store is the combined efforts of thousands of people, thousands of workers coming together to create something, and that all of human history and human civilization has been collective efforts. We are collective creatures, so we need to start thinking about how we can work collectively as human beings to resolve these crises and not continue to believe that individualism should take precedence above all else.
I want to on that last note. I think it's both. I think humans have a unique and unprecedented potential to both individuate ourselves and to act collectively. We are the most social of all known organisms, and we have the ability to distinguish ourselves from other humans to a degree that isn't surpassed by any other. That isn't surpassed by any other species on the face of this planet. But both can be true at once, and in some sense, both being true synergistically allows the other to be more true as well, with the intense diversity of cultures, the intense diversity of ways of operating on the face of this earth. Anyway, that's enough philosophy. I'm just trying to look for any notes of optimism here. We were just talking about social media suppression, and then at the end you were just calling for increased collaboration. We live in a vacuum in America, and I can see that. We've certainly been atomized. The pandemic only seems to have made that much, much worse, with more and more of our interactions increasingly being mediated by social media. But as we were just talking about, and I agree with you, under a Biden administration, social media's control is going to increase. Social media's control of our lives, our ability to think, our ability to speak, our ability to communicate and collaborate is going to increase. Any note of optimism here, Caleb? Anywhere you can see for us to make progress on this in our last minute?
Well, I think if you look around the world, the tide is turning against the radical individualism and the neoliberal economic policies that the United States has championed and really pushed hard, especially since the end of the Cold War. I think, countries are moving ahead. And if you look at the strike right now in India, where the working people, the farmers and the workers are standing up to neoliberal reforms, if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, that China is pushing, if you look at the Eurasian Economic Union and Russia's efforts, if you look at what's going on with the space program from China, I think there are a lot of very, very good positive developments in the world right now. And that there is a real pushback against the kind of libertarian insanity that's gripped the United States for the last few decades. And I think things are changing globally. Domestically, we're in for some hard times. But humanity as a whole is marching ahead.
That is optimistic. And that is a great note to close on. Caleb, thank you for joining us.
Sure thing.
For those listening, that was the voice of Caleb Maupin, speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. You should check out his new book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts. That book examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. And by the way, you can and should follow Caleb on Twitter at Caleb Maupin. Also read his articles at calebmaupin.com. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls on the other side of this break, 202-521-1320. We will be back taking your calls in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. Again, that's 202-521-1320. We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you were on the line. What's on your mind?
Yeah, y'all was just saying earlier, there was 2 guys that was arrested over the past week. Jean-Luc Brunel and the other guy, what's his name? Peter Nego, that was in contact with Jeff Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell. I was thinking about something. So if they start squealing on people because somebody spoke, squealed on them, told on them, probably Maxwell, and they could start giving out the business, like telling them who they work with, who they blackmail, whatever. If they have information on politicians, that's Republicans and Democrats and judges or whatnot, they can really shake up the whole foundation of the system. And, might see something happen before January the 1st, before the everything gets said and done. And that maybe it could affect the election itself. You never know. And people could start telling on each other, trying to get better sentences. But I'm just throwing that out there. You never know what these people know. These 2 men that was arrested for human trafficking, that was friends with Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeff Epstein, they was running their own little operations. So we don't know what type of black books and evidence they have. So let's see what they're gonna say. So that's all I want.
Thank you. Thank you for the call. Yeah, we reported on Jean-Luc Brunel this morning. We hadn't talked about Peter Nygaard. I hadn't heard about it, I'll be honest. I saw that coming up this morning when you're posting links to that on Twitter. And this comes as this week, Ghislaine Maxwell, I guess, technically last week, but within the last week, Ghislaine Maxwell calling jail oppressive as she's asking to be released on a $28.5 million bond. Again, former partner, associate, madam of Jeffrey Epstein.
To be fair, it is jail. It is jail. I mean, it's oppressive by definition.
It is. It is. You know what? We've got other callers. 202-521-1320 is the number to call. We have Nancy calling in from Florida. Nancy, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Hi. Yeah, I was calling about the Force the Vote movement. And I just wanted to say that Jimmy Dore came up with a really great idea that motivated people. He wanted us to force the progressives to challenge Nancy Pelosi to bring a bill that Paul wrote to the floor and make her bring it to the floor for a vote. And Jimmy Dore thinks that people will not vote against a Medicare for All bill in the middle of a pandemic. And if they do, then it just exposes them to the fact that we elected all of these progressives to go into go and represent us, and they've all just become part of the establishment. So, I think he was starting a movement. I think that movement started getting some steam, and then all those TYT, Jacobin, Sam Cedar types started acting like middle management and throwing cover for the power. And they're trying to throw it into the weeds. And that's what David Sirota was doing when he came on Jimmy's show. So I feel like, y'all attacking Jimmy is exactly what he said not to do. He said, don't make it about me. Go out there, all you people in YouTube land, and talk to your audiences and tell them about this idea. So instead of saying Jimmy Dore, blah, 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 but this is a great idea, they went off like, this is a great idea, but Jimmy Dore, blah, 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 and made it all about Jimmy Dore. And I just feel like TYT sort of has an ulterior motive, because they are the ones who push this, Justice Democrats, and got all these progressives, and we're supposed to go in and take over the Democratic Party and get things done for progressives. And as soon as they shut down Bernie Sanders, all those people jumped on board with Biden. They're just part of the establishment, and they're trying to shut down a movement. So my idea is, hey, let's call our progressive representatives and tell them to hold the vote for Speaker until Nancy Pelosi agrees to bring Medicare for All to a vote. That's all we got to do. Unless we fail, then we'll be like a battering ram, and we'll come back with something else. That's the only way we're going to get through the power, especially with all these people who call themselves progressives, trying to fight us.
I feel you, Nancy.
Thank you for the call.
Yeah, I feel you.
I feel it too.
I don't know, man. Look, I know people are getting into their enclaves on this stuff. And, what started off as what I think is a decent idea ends up into just vitriolic back and forth between two sides. And I got to be honest, at a certain point, it gets ridiculous. Like, one person starts off and the idea is good. Like the premise behind the idea is great. And if I'm not mistaken, even Cedar came out and sheepishly was okay with the idea. Everything started to turn when, it just got vitriolic. And,
but here's the thing.
One side
maybe that's
sets
what's necessary.
Rails for the other side, the boundaries. And at that point, nobody was
Maybe that's needed.
Go ahead, Shane.
So as we were talking about both publicly and privately, tired of talking about this thing, because it's just much ado about nothing and much more of the same. And again, you end up talking about talking instead of talking about whatever it is that you're supposed to be talking about, if that makes sense. Another way to look at this, though, briefly, we've got a couple more calls, 202-521-1320. Another way to look at this is maybe you need those enclaves. Maybe you need to create those divisions because, you're doing the categorization thing. You're saying, okay, we're over here, they're over there. And then as long as we're all over here, maybe we should create some institution or some sort of permanent vehicle for our convictions that can actually lead to substantive change in the long run. And, if this is going to simmer out in the next weeks, then it was a flash in the pan, and you're wasting momentum. You're wasting energy that could be captured and turned into something. But if you're going to have that political movement, you do need to have some degree of self-categorization, some identity. We are this, we are not that. And if it can turn into a political movement, if it can turn into, like she's talking about, building up something that lasts, where we are going to come back, it's not going to end with this one issue, then, bygones be bygones. What was necessary was necessary. And ideally, down the line, it actually works. I don't know. What's your take on that? We got a couple more calls.
It just doesn't look like that. I mean, it just looks like division. Like, it doesn't look like, because look, I have serious qualms with somebody coming out and saying, I am the progressive, and if you don't agree with each and everything that I say, and at that point, they can smear you and say whatever they want to say about you. And then people turn around and back the person up in basically being uncouth. It's like, I could spit on you, and they're like, well, hey, man, you shouldn't focus so much on the guy's personality who spit on the guy. You should focus on what the guy was trying to say when he spit on him. And it's like, come on, are you serious? What if the other guy spit on him back? And them two end up in a fight and just escalates. I guess my issue here is you can have this conversation. You could push AOC. You can go after all of the squad. You can go after all of the progressive movement in and of itself. Because Nancy is right. Even if they say no, meaning if these guys are going to go in the middle of a pandemic and say, yeah, we're not going to back that up, then run against them. Medicare for All has 88% support in the Democratic Party. It allows you to run against them, especially if AOC is like, we got to primary some folks. How do you think you're going to do that? Well, right here, you get an issue. You create that separation. You create that division. But the problem becomes that the left basically split in half. It's the weirdest thing ever. I don't know if you've been seeing this on Twitter, Shane, but it's been just a fight. And it's like the issue itself almost like was secondary to the fight. It is very bizarre. And I got to be honest, this doesn't necessarily seem all that helpful. It doesn't necessarily, because think about what happens from the standpoint of an AOC. How do you lose force trying to push an AOC at the point where this becomes confusion? That's all. I feel you in regards to, the separation stuff. But it seems that the left, for the most part, agrees with like 99% of the topics of the same thing. And if you went to something like a forum, you would have like 5 different organizations. Like it's the bizarre thing. All of them believe in the same thing. It's just they have like a modicum of a way of going about doing it. So I don't know. This started off as something I thought it was great. And I think each side kind of has a point about the attacks that have been taking place. So fair enough. And like under normal circumstances, it comes both sides. So fair enough. I don't know. It's just disappointing. That's all. Something that was good just became a mess. So
maybe, but that's life often.
Yeah,
we've got Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, good morning, guys. Real quick, I don't want to take up too much time. I actually agree with you, Shane. It is becoming very irritating. Use my own words. It's becoming very irritating. I think we need to understand that, first and foremost, this is politics. This is the nature of politics. To try and control the behavior of a zillion people online or whatever is impossible. So if we have a movement, if we have a goal, then we should be very specific and we should continue to push towards that goal. The people that are calling in, the people that are tweeting, they're going to feel however they're going to feel, whether for or against. That's fine. That's the nature of humanity. We can't do anything about that. But those who are in a position to inform people and who have a platform to speak should be consistent. If you are indeed supporting of the cause, should be consistent in pushing people towards taking action. Not just calling your progressive representatives. Call all of them. Call all of them. This, whether you know it or not, Shane, you actually made an ADOS point. Yvette is very good and very very poignant about saying we have to be singularly focused, right? So everything else is a distraction. This is literally what happened to Ice Cube, right, at the head of everything. So I'll go out by saying that, don't worry about the conversation. Don't worry about who's acting like what. Don't worry about the vitriol and all that. I mean, yeah, it's cool for conversation on the show, but push the people to call into the representatives and blow up those lines. That's the most important thing, because it's always going to be opposition. And then secondly, really enjoyed the Franco spot, the Frank analysis spot. Wish we could get him back on to talk more about Event 201, because, I mean, the Jimmy Dore thing is going to be what it's going to be, and we've heard that conversation a lot. But really enjoyed the show today, guys. Take care.
Hey, thanks, Brave. Thank you for the comments. We got another caller, so I think I want to just go straight to him, but there's definitely stuff to respond to there. So thank you for the call, Brave from Atlanta. We have Jeff calling in from Michigan. Jeff, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, both of you, for trying to hold rational discourse in this time of division that we're finding ourselves in. But the reason I called is I'm a health scientist, and I'm just greatly alarmed by the lack of discourse concerning the new COVID vaccines, the Western ones in particular, being the genetically engineered mRNA and DNA vaccine technologies that are coming out of like Pfizer and AstraZeneca and Moderna. And it just seems like everyone in the U.S. has been so psychologically fatigued and in economic hardship that they're just reaching out for some savior. And no one's talking about the safety of these vaccines. Everyone's just talking about the efficacy of these vaccines. But efficacy is only one issue and safety is the other. And what concerns me is that these are unprecedented new biotechnologies, and they're trying to put modified genetics into ourselves to produce the spike proteins of this virus. It just seems to me that when we have known and proven, multiple decades of proven vaccine technologies like inactivated and attenuated virus vaccines, which are the common ones like mumps and measles, rubella, that type of thing that we're all used to, those technologies can easily produce COVID-19 vaccines. And in the case of the China vaccines,
Jeff, we are out of time. We're straight up running against a hard break. I want to thank you for the call, and thank you first of all for the nice comments, also for the commentary. We should come back and talk about that. We have Mikhail Kogan on coming on occasionally. Hopefully we can get him back on soon. Talk about the vaccines, the whys, the why nots. In any event, thank you everybody for joining us this morning. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back tomorrow. Have a great day, folks.
Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Another one is in the books. All right, I'm going to go up and I'm going to check on Mrs. Thomas. But you guys will most likely see me later today. So I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe, and I will see you guys, I don't know, maybe an hour or 2 hours. But most likely you'll see me later today. So, all right, guys. Great show. Another one in the record books. Like, share, subscribe. Thanks all. Oh, by the way, make sure you subscribe. Google does some weird stuff sometimes. YouTube does weird stuff. So definitely make sure you hit the notification bell. Make sure you hit the subscription button and all of that jazz. Thanks all.